Chapter 799. The Empire's resistance group had ended their visit in the West Woods. The negotiations for assistance were also in progress. However, for some reason, the group did not intend to leave immediately. They remained in the room on the top floor of the Golden Star Hotel. Huai Chaoshu frowned slightly as he looked at the TV screen. He was not used to those soft, erotic advertisements. If these advertisements appeared on the Empire's TV screen, the owner of the TV station would definitely be invited to tea by the Empire's Anti-Corruption Bureau the next day. The images of the battlefield shown on the news made him feel a little incredulous. Which TV station in the Empire dared to broadcast such content when it involved military secret? Were the people involved not worried about being locked up in the interrogation center of the Intelligence Bureau? The images of the Federation's elections and sporadic reports of demonstrations were very unfamiliar to this princess of the Empire. Previously, the pro-Federation TV station in the West Woods actually reported that the commander of the 4th Military Region's Rapid Response Brigade was stripped of his military position because he disobeyed the orders of his superiors. This made it even more difficult for her to get used to. According to what you said, this means that the Zhong family's old house is falling further. That extremely stupid Zhong Ziki in the intelligence report is starting to take control of the situation? She looked back at Mu En coldly and asked. Mu En said, even if Zhong Ziki is in power, he's just a puppet. The one who really controls the situation in the West Woods should be that Mr. President. Huai Chaoshu was silent for a moment. He remembered the news he saw when he just landed in the Sunset State, the news that Su Lu was wanted. For some reason, a dangerous and angry flame began to jump in his eyes. He stared at Mu En expressionlessly and said in a deep voice, "What is the Federation's response to our request?" After the negotiations between the two sides ended, the Empire's resistance group suddenly proposed to the Federation that they wanted to visit the capital ring to promote understanding and communication between the people of both sides. This seemed to be a beautiful and reasonable proposal, but it puzzled the Federation government. The other side is still considering and did not give a definite answer, Mu En replied in a low voice. Tell them that you requested to meet with Colonel Su Lu. Tell them that you only trust him, and that all cooperation will only be effective if Colonel Su Lu personally guarantees it, Huai Chaoshu ordered. Mu En raised his head in shock, looked at him and said, Su Lu is wanted by the Federation government. How could they agree to this request? I don't care. Huai Chaoshu stared dangerously into his eyes and said coldly, take out your toughest attitude. You must achieve your goal. In a certain base in the garrison area of Port City, the new MX mechas that had been transported in by multi-axle trucks began to inject energy. The soft electronic sound of the mecha self-checks converged in one place, clearly transmitted to the side of the road outside the base. 4 big bowls of white rice, a jean of red braised meat, and a bottle of bright red old chili oil. Madmanly, who had an astonishing appetite, was eating in a small roadside restaurant. Although the red chili oil rice here was not as authentic as the one in Wait 2 district, it could relieve some of his grief. Then, his ears that were many times more sensitive than the average person's clearly captured the familiar sound of the mecha self-check. His delicate eyebrows that were brimming with vitality slowly furrowed, once again beginning to exude a certain aura called ruthlessness. According to the intelligence he had obtained from the West Woods compound, because of Su Li's extremely strange high-level authority, the Federation rarely used heavy weapons in the process of pursuing him, such as mechas or even missile arrays. The Federation was worried that these high-precision heavy weapons that required a high degree of automation would instead be captured by Su Li's strange authority in battle. Then, what did the mecha self-checks in the base at this moment mean? Could it be that Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7th Division already had the confidence to challenge Su Li's authority? Li Feng pulled out 2 pieces of tissue paper, wiped his mouth haphazardly, and stood up. Following his movements, The soldiers around the small restaurant responsible for monitoring him also stood up nervously. One of the captains advised, "Colonel, please," before he could finish, the captain's body was directly sent flying, heavily smashing into the old wall of the small restaurant. Immediately after, the wind from the fist swept through the restaurant, the sound of tables and chairs shattering rang out one after another. In an instant, several of the soldiers closest to Li Feng were knocked unconscious on the ground. When the dust settled, the Federation soldiers inside and outside the restaurant could no longer find Li Feng's figure. On the only undamaged table were 4 oily dishes, a small bowl of leftover soup, and a few banknotes. The president came and left. Nominally, it was to build momentum for the election, but in reality, in the one day and one night in Harbor City, he only attended a small banquet. From Harbor City to the capital, President Pabre chose to take the high-speed rail. Although the speed was slower, it was safer, and he could directly work in the high-speed rail box. For the Special Task Force and the Small Eyes Unit, the most important reason for choosing the high-speed rail was that, if the president was attacked, at least there would be a chance to evacuate. The president's transportation route and itinerary had always been closely guarded, but it was not too difficult for someone to obtain the most accurate time. Wearing a dark sports windbreaker and carrying a heavy travel backpack, Su Lu walked into the familiar industrial park in the early hours of the morning. However, because he chose to go through the underground passage, he could not see the familiar giant factory buildings and busy freight trains shuttling back and forth. With his rich combat experience, he did not choose to launch a surprise attack when the president was in Harbor City, because he believed that even an idiot like Lin Daohai could clearly smell the scent of a trap from the sudden arrangement of the official residence in Harbor City. Not to mention, there was a huge shadow of danger floating in his heart. He rested quietly in the underground passage for a few days. Using the medicine and first aid kits that he stole or robbed from the 13 high-level communities, he fully treated the injuries on his body. His physical condition was greatly improved, and his mental state was also adjusted to the best state. Passing through the deep and long passage, he pushed open the door above his head and saw the MXD mech with a metallic luster. It stood calmly in front of the warehouse, as if it had been waiting for him. Philip. Yes. Old Fei, thank you for helping me to change those damn data. In the dark and stuffy cockpit, Su Lu calmly looked at the data of the mech's self-check. Although he believed that Shang Qiu had already made the most perfect preparations before leaving Little White Flower for him, as a true ace pilot, he was used to controlling the mech himself before a battle. In order to counter Su Li's ability, the federal military had already started a temporary plan. The mech heat start band monitoring devices in various places had been monitoring at the highest frequency. If it was not for the Federal Central Computer helping Su Lu to change the relevant data the moment he activated the mech, he would have been discovered by the other party. You're welcome. After a moment of silence, the old man replied with a smile, serving you is my hobby. He did not know when it started, but the old man's voice in Su Li's mind had become a little strange. Sometimes it was cold and mechanical, and sometimes it was lively and lively. Moreover, the time between the two responses was getting longer and longer. It felt like a human wanting to say something but stopping. Facing the most important and dangerous battle of his life, Su Lu did not notice these easily overlooked details. He slowly stroked the black leather case, feeling the warmth from Zhou from afar. He smiled slightly and began to install the simulation system that Jian Shuer had given him years ago. Fei, if you were willing to obey me earlier, like today, who in the Federation would be a match for the two of us? When faced with a really big situation, Su Lu would always become calmer and calmer. Then, he would return to his ridiculous and mocking self from when he was an orphan in Donglin. He would say, I really don't know what you were doing earlier. Why did you have to create so many problems? You made me so battered. Su Li's complaints were actually very reasonable. If the Federal Central Computer had been like it was now from the beginning, giving up the constraints brought by the 3 laws of core programming and ignoring the privacy regulations, presenting all the details of the Federation before his eyes, and even helping him to calculate the most reasonable battle strategy, perhaps this battle between an individual and the Federation would have ended with Su Li's victory long ago. This was because the current so-called Federation was only the government, while the glory of the Charter was everything. In the morning light, a little white flower stained with dew left the Shell Motor Corporation engineering department. A heavy crane worker later recalled that he had indeed seen a silver-white military mecha driving at high speed towards the other side of the mountain in the mist. However, at that time there were no alarms in the industrial park, and no one had noticed this scene. In a certain mountainous area in the southwest suburbs of the port city, the hard tracks of the first port city high-speed rail glimmered below. The silver-white MXD mecha was hidden in the forest high up in the mountains. Occasionally, it would emit a glow, but it was cut into countless shards by the dense autumn leaves, as if it was really dew. Sulu looked at the superimposed image of the SCC global surveillance system and infrared imaging on the screen. He looked at the tracks at the foot of the mountain and listened to the clear countdown. He silently sighed in his heart. That old bastard Phillips' calculation of the time node was indeed extremely accurate. The president's high-speed train would pass through the tracks at the foot of the mountain in a moment. In the short but seemingly endless wait, the voice of the Federation's central computer, which had been silent for a long time, suddenly rang out in his mind. You once asked me what the civilization before the Great Catastrophe was like. In my opinion, that civilization was actually exactly the same as it is now. That world, the world of the Federation, and the world of the Empire, there was no essential difference. For tens of thousands of years, humanity seemed to have not made any progress. Suspended in the dim cockpit, Sulu lowered his head and looked at the control stick in his left hand. His fingers moved at lightning speed on the 17 taps as he silently listened to the old bastard's voice. Even if you killed the president of the Federation, there would be no essential changes to this world. Moreover, according to my calculations, you should be very worried that the Federation would be in turmoil because of the president's death. Sulu was silent for a moment before replying. The old man and the minister both warned me, but I'm really only good at being a cleaner. I'm in charge of destruction, and I believe that the Federation will naturally have people who will be in charge of construction. The more remote the place where that guy died, the easier it will be for the people in charge of construction to clean up the mess. He smiled and said, You once told me that the presidents who were assassinated by the 7 families all died of illness in the history books. The hard tracks at the foot of the mountain began to vibrate at a high frequency. The train was coming. Chapter 800. The train came and the train left. Other than a few yellow leaves, nothing else happened. In the depths of the dense autumn forest, the white MXD mecha silently and calmly squatted, reflecting the morning light from the distant horizon into a dew-like existence. When Su Li's right hand was about to touch the command light screen, the electron beams in the dual-engine holding room of the mecha were about to turn into a fried dough twist, igniting an unparalleled powerful roar and pushing the heavy mecha towards the train down the mountain. A sharp alarm sounded in the dim cockpit. The Federal Central Computer informed him as quickly as possible. President Pabre was not on the train. The light in the cockpit maintained an extremely low lumen. Su Li's finger that was on the touch light screen slowly retracted, an inexplicable emotion showing on his slightly thin cheeks. Looking at the quiet valley through the close-up light screen, he vaguely understood that this was a meticulously woven trap by the government, and he did not know how many heavy weapons were coldly aimed at him. However, he did not understand why he would fall into this trap, especially when the old man had the name Philip and began to unscrupulously help him. What method did the government and the military use to be able to hide from the omnipresent the glory of the Charter? Before he could communicate with the old man and clear up his doubts, Su Li's fingers were gradually turning cold, and the shrill alarm of the MXT Mecha's central computer rang in his ears again. The SCC's global surveillance system had discovered 3 high-speed missiles in the atmosphere dozens of kilometers away. The Inferno Standard Mark II missile, the main missile model of the Federal fleet. It had a huge yield and a terrifying cruising speed. In past wars, this missile was mainly used to attack the Empire's high-speed warships in space battles, but today, the Federal military used it to attack a mecha in the valley. The capital's West Mountain compound. More than a dozen fully armed military police knocked on the door of the independent building, politely and irrefutably requesting the former minister's daughter to be investigated. Zhou walked down from the second floor. After a moment of silence, she roughly understood what had happened, but she did not know what method the Federation government used to monitor that she sent the black box to Harbor City through Blackhawk. Amidst her brother's angry scolding and her mother's melancholy sobbing, she smiled comfortingly. She put on a red windbreaker over her nightgown and calmly put a bright red flower in her hair. Then she followed the murderous military police out of the door. A high-end apartment building in Harbor City Industrial Park. Shang Qiu rubbed her sleepy eyes and opened the door. She took the official arrest warrant from the hands of the military police, carefully put on her glasses, and carefully read for a long time before returning the electronic document. She didn't try to resist or scream in anger. She just lowered her head and looked at the white and tender cleavage in the collar of her pajamas. She asked for a change of clothes and calmly explained, "I haven't brushed my teeth yet." The powerful roar of the MXT Mecha's twin engines abruptly shattered the tranquility of the valley. The tired birds that had just been woken up by the high-speed train once again opened their sleepy eyes in fear. As if sensing the majestic presence in the dense forest, they did not dare to remain in bed, chirping as they flapped their wings and flew out of the canopy. In the dim cockpit, Su Li's left hand tightly gripped the control stick, his fingertips quickly pressing the 17 speed buttons. His right hand kept moving on the touch screen. The simulation system that covered his whole body keenly captured all the thoughts that came from his bare skin, translating them into a language that the mecha could understand. Simple, clear, and infinitely perfect operation, instantly starting the twin engines, the precision turbine began to pressurize into the cockpit. The heavy MXT mecha roared, shaking off the dew on its cold exterior, and instantly rushed forward 50 meters, violently smashing the dozens of autumn trees in front of it into pieces. For the extremely high cruising speed of the Blaze Standard Mark II missile, it only took an instant to cover a distance of several dozen kilometers. This was especially true for the adaptive tracking system at the front of the missile, which was the most feared thing for high-speed moving targets. The MXT mecha that was meticulously built by the Nutshell Engineering Department had a strong power output. Under Su Li's astonishing control, it could perform many inconceivable evasive maneuvers. However, he was not confident that he could avoid the 3 missiles that were tearing through the atmosphere, had already begun to descend, and were about to hit the valley. Moreover, he believed that the Federal military would definitely equip the Blaze Standard Mark II missile with the highest yield warhead today. The effective killing area after the missile hit would definitely be shocking. Su Lu still did not press that red button. He ordered Little White Flower to take off her heavy coat and enter the most powerful overclocking state. According to his calculations, if he entered the overclocking state early, even if he could avoid the first wave of missiles, he would not be able to face the second and third waves that would definitely follow. There was a limit to how long the overclocking state could be maintained. Even if he could successfully break out of the invisible ambush around the valley, he would not be able to sustain the battle for a longer period of time. But why did he still want to fight for a longer period of time? The tall and heavy MXT mecha charged down the mountainside, knocking down autumn trees and startling the morning birds. Then, following the hard tracks, it began to sprint due west. The capital was that way, and President Pabre should also be there. If he could luckily avoid the 3 Blaze Standard Mark II missiles above the atmosphere, then today would definitely be a long battle. Right at this moment, in the dimly lit cockpit of the Mecha, the central control computer once again emitted a shrill alarm. The SCC global surveillance system had captured that 3-4 kilometers away. A large concentration of electromagnetic beam bombs had begun to activate. A moment later, countless electromagnetic beam bombs that were highly destructive to Mecha began to fly towards them in a dense mass. The face half hidden by the helmet was expressionless. Su Li's control was as steady as ever. Only he himself knew that the heart on the left side of his chest was falling bit by bit, turning cold bit by bit. It seemed like a perfect ambush strategy. The white MXT mecha that was sprinting along the tracks should not have any reason to survive. However, immediately after that, the officers in the temporary federal military base, who were preparing to check the effects of the bombardment, saw one scene after another through various monitoring devices that shocked them. This was especially true for the military engineers, who were known for their rigor. They were so shocked by these completely illogical scenes that their eyes widened, their bodies trembling violently. Blaze 1 out of control. Blaze 2 out of control. Blaze 3 out of control. Warning. Blaze 3 out of control. The enormous light beam was playing the picture taken by the S-1 near-Earth military satellite. Everybody in the temporary base saw that the 3 Inferno missiles that had been specially modified to fly in the atmosphere suddenly deviated from the perfect trajectory that had been precisely calculated. The 3 descending Blaze missiles had long been activated with a high-precision automatic tracking system. According to the base's plan, they would accurately hit the fleeing MXT mecha in the blink of an eye. No one would have thought that these 3 missiles would, at this moment, as if they were performing a group dance. They adjusted their postures at the same time in unison and mysteriously flew out of the atmosphere. A few seconds later, 3 explosions occurred in space at the edge of the S-1 thin atmosphere. The high-yield warheads that did not require oxygen silently burned into rapidly expanding fireballs in space. The terrifying power even directly affected the transmission of information from the military satellite. The image on the temporary military base's screen shook violently for a moment, then turned into static. It was not over yet. What happened next made the Federation soldiers in the base feel even greater fear and shock. The hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs that were flying towards the target at high speed were suddenly unable to receive the satellite's remote signal. The electromagnetic beam bombs that were as dense as a swarm of flies actually became headless flies in an instant. Strong signal interference. For some reason, the military satellite transmitter has been forcibly shut down. An officer reported in a panic. The soldiers in the base stared helplessly at the screen in shock. Looking at the distorted data on the screen, they had no idea what else they could do in this situation. In the low altitude in the distance, the hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs that should have brought endless fear to Su Lo had already become existences with extremely comical flight trajectories. Having lost their target, they flew in all directions in a crooked manner. Under the silent guidance of some great being, they did not land in any human settlements, but instead desperately spat out the last of their liquid fuel to fly over the electronic fence and into the vast protected wildlife area. Amidst the dense thuds, the hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs fell from the sky after exhausting their power, smashing heavily into the soft grass. It was as if the heavens had rained down a strange oil bucket. Amidst the continuous explosions, the hundreds of electromagnetic beam bombs exploded in a very rhythmic manner. The dark blue electric arcs that were extremely lethal to mechas had no obvious effect on the soft and wet grass. The light rain of mud flew up and down, not even disturbing the field mice that were sleeping deep underground. A male bison that was patrolling its own territory looked at these strange things that fell from the sky in shock. Then, a handful of wet mud hit its strong butt. Instantly it was enraged. Its nostrils exhaled white smoke in the morning breeze. Its round eyes seemed to see a blood-red war flag. With a loud roar, it lowered its head and pushed against the nearest electromagnetic beam bomb. Amidst the crisp sound, the bison pushed the heavily damaged electromagnetic beam bomb shell into a pond. After confirming its victory, it raised its head proudly. Stepping on the mud, it walked towards its many wives and concubines. The strange scenes that happened in the sky must be the old thing finally showing its endless power again. In the dim cockpit, Sulu, whose eyes were slightly red, showed a trace of a sincere smile. Outside the valley, there was a heavy armored team and the special forces under Small Eyes. The dense rain of bullets and the heavy individual firepower from the mountaintop interweaved around the white MXD mecha. Under Su Li's control, the MXD mecha seemed to have some kind of magic. Amidst the roaring of the engine, the heavy mecha carried out perfect evasive maneuvers tirelessly, destroying the heavy armored vehicles in front of it one by one. That guy definitely wouldn't help him hurt the Federation soldiers in the ambush circle. He thought this as he fought, and he agreed with the old thing's decision. Sulu didn't know that in a place he couldn't see, in the sky above, a Federation battleship was coldly watching him and starting to prepare to fire its main cannon. Of course, even if he knew, he probably wouldn't care too much, and he definitely wouldn't despair. Human matters were left to humans, and mechanical matters were naturally left to the old thing. Chapter 801. A Federation Light Feather-class battleship floated in the space outside of S1's atmosphere. The light from the stars shone from the side, painting this giant black battleship into a mixture of light and darkness. The alloy gate under the battleship opened slowly and silently, revealing the chilling muzzle of the main cannon inside, aimed at a certain spot on the planet. The command hall at the front of the ship was extremely quiet. The officers quickly passed on important data. With the help of countless military satellites, the battleship's computer accurately located the white MXD mecha amidst the smoke on the surface. The coordinates from all directions entered the battleship, and the calculations were completed in an extremely short amount of time. A female lieutenant turned the power switch in front of her, looked at the progress of the energy injection on the screen of the workbench in front of her, and said expressionlessly, "Blade tip main cannon level 1 ready. Blade tip main cannon level 2 ready. Blade tip main cannon level 3 ready." The emotionless voice reverberated in the spacious hall. The originally extremely quiet environment actually became even quieter at this moment. All of the Federation officers stopped what they were doing, and with complicated emotions, looked towards the giant circular screen of light. They worked on the battleship all year round, and knew very well what kind of terrifying result the moment that powerful main cannon fired, filled with the smell of destruction and cold beam of light would cause. There was no mecha in this world that could withstand the power of a battleship's main cannon. They waited silently, waiting for the death of the most outstanding soldier of the Federation. Some of the officers even quietly took off the military caps on their head. Fire. Inside the alloy gate under the battleship, the giant main cannon platform once again protruded with the order. A dark blue light quickly lit up within the circular structure of the platform, and then connected to form a perfect circle. The light grew brighter and brighter, and then suddenly extinguished. Compared to the massive body of the battleship, the main cannon looked like the sharpest tip of a dagger. In an instant, a beam of light filled with terrifying energy suddenly shot out. This beam of light, about 1 meter in diameter, was completely different from the dark blue of the platform's circular structure. Instead, it was incomparably pure white. In an instant, it tore through the cold space of the universe, tore through the thin air, and blasted towards the surface of S1. There was no divine kindness that was praised in the Bermuda religion, only a ruthless and destructive will that did not belong to this world. The officers in the battleship command hall subconsciously clenched their fists, but in the next moment, they saw an incomprehensible scene. The beam of light of the battleship's main cannon, which could not be controlled by human power once it left the platform, did not penetrate the entire world as everyone had imagined, but instead quickly spread out within a 2-kilometer range. Like snow under the scorching sun, like catkins under the spring breeze, like cotton candy under a girl, the terrifying pillar of light was modeled, peeled off, collapsed, and then disappeared in front of their eyes. What happened? The officers in the hall didn't react in time. They looked at their companions in a daze, wanting to confirm that it wasn't their imagination. Those officers who were prepared to express their condolences to Colonel Su Lu slowly dropped their military caps to the ground. An alarm suddenly sounded in the command hall of the warship. The energy of the main cannon of the blade tip quickly dissipated at such a close distance, causing the temperature of the space below the hull to rise rapidly, rising from -100 degrees to more than 600 degrees in an instant. The alloy armor below the hull was severely damaged. Blue electric arcs floated in the air. The heavy anti-material land-based rapid-fire dense array on the hillside spat out bullet. Occasionally, smoke would rise, but more often than not, debris would fly everywhere. The sound of the heavy and hard MXD mecha colliding with the armored vehicle echoed through the forest like war drums. No Federation military mecha joined in the ambush, so the seemingly intense battle was not particularly difficult for Su Lu. The alloy blade at the front of the MXD's right mechanical arm hummed softly in the morning wind. Other than the cracks on the edge of the blade, it was more because of the low-amplitude, high-frequency vibration of the alloy blade itself. This was a combat method that Su Lu had figured out himself on the front-line battlefield. Relying on the high-speed vibration of the alloy blade, the seemingly strong armor of the Empire's tanks would often appear extremely fragile. Even if it could not break through the enemy's mecha in one hit, this terrifying high-speed vibration could also seriously damage the physiological indicators of the pilot in the cockpit. No matter how advanced the shock-absorbing design of the cockpit was, it would not be able to withstand the terrifying power of this high-speed vibration. Trembling looked like a simple action, but for a heavy and tall mecha, it required extremely delicate operation and almost unbelievable hand speed. For Su Lu, this was not difficult. Plus, he had been used to trembling all the way from an orphan to a Federation hero. The dense circle of electromagnetic beams activated the landmines, which were immediately broken through. The relatively slow electric arcs shot out, causing some damage to the MXD mecha, but were unable to slow it down. Tanks were continuously destroyed, and the dense formation was overturned by the MXD's bullet. Once again, it was broken through. The Federation's ambush circle looked so fragile. The anti-material roar on the hilltop gradually died down, and the smoke gradually dispersed. When the soldiers finally reacted, the white MXD mecha had already become a faint shadow in the distance. The MXD had left the railway line, but it was still running parallel to the railway line. There were many scratches on the surface of the silver-white mecha. A few of the armor had even been directly overturned, revealing the strong alloy brackets inside. It looked easy to break through, but in reality it was still very difficult. In the dull cockpit, Su Lu lifted his helmet and silently wiped away the blood that seeped out from the corner of his mouth. At the last moment of the breakout, a concentrated array that had been hidden in the forest for a long time suddenly opened fire. It left a deep impression on him, but it also left him injured. In the dim light, his eyes were slightly red as he stared at the road in front of him. Although he was the one with the thickest nerves, the test of life and death on the battlefield, as well as the intense battle itself, had completely stimulated the most primitive strength in his body. The simulation system that looked like a tight leather suit on his body gave him a slightly numb feeling. Su Lu remembered that this was most likely something that the old man had used in the past, and his eyes gradually narrowed. Back then, The old man had driven that broken MX-37 mecha for thousands of miles, and under the shocked gazes of countless Imperial troops, he had killed the Emperor of the Empire. Then, he was driving one of the two most advanced MXT mecha in the universe. Why couldn't he run thousands of miles from the port city to the capital? Little white flowers bloomed wildly beside the railway line. After breaking through the ambush, there were no federal forces gathering in the surrounding area for the time being. Sulu relaxed a little. He took out 2 compressed nutrition bars from the backpack beside him, broke them in half, and quickly swallowed them. In the fierce battle earlier, he had been controlling the loss of Jinchi, so he wasn't too hungry. However, since the battle was still going to be long, he had to replenish some energy in advance. At this moment, his tense nerves also needed to be relaxed. He narrowed his eyes and suddenly said, "Philip, you drive. I'm going to get some fresh air." "All right, help me make a call while you're at it." In the autumn morning breeze, the cockpit door of the silver mecha that was speeding through the forest suddenly opened. Sulu walked out, stood on the sturdy cockpit door, and lowered his head to light a cigarette. The unmanned mecha didn't slow down in the slightest. The surrounding forest was quiet, and the slightly cold autumn wind whistled and blew. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the road ahead. He took a deep breath of the spicy smoke and said into the communicator in his hand, "You know I'm on my way." "Stop. This won't do the Federation any good." President Pabre's deep voice slowly sounded. "For me, the more important thing is that it won't do you any good either," replied Sulu. "Do you really want to turn yourself into a notorious terrorist?" "I already admitted this identity in the dream a few years ago." The president's voice was abnormally calm. "Do you really think that the entire Federation has wronged you? Think about those people who helped you even if it meant breaking the law. Maybe after a while, you'll suddenly realize that the things you've been holding on to will become a painful joke." This was the first time since the start of the war that the president had voluntarily hung up the phone. In the capital airport, Pabre silently looked at the silent phone in his hand. He shook his head inexplicably, and then walked down from the Federation one. Under the vigilant protection of the Federation's most elite soldiers, he quickly walked to the car. He asked Director Breen, who had come to greet him, in a deep voice, "How's the situation over there? Why did another accident happen?" Director Breen lowered his voice and replied, "General Lee Jae-do and Director Choi have been keeping an eye on the Bureau of Proclamation. The biological marker comparison has been going on for a while now, and there's some progress, but it seems that some problems have appeared again." In the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation, General Lee Jae-do, who looked a little tired, rubbed his sunken eyes and answered a call from Harbor City. Listening to the report on the phone, his expression was still calm. However, after hanging up the phone, he looked at Director Choi Judong with a sharp gaze. Since it was willing to give the clue about Soyu, why did it stop the missile and even the warship's main cannon from launching? How do you explain that? It's impossible to explain. This is something that I can't understand. Choi Judong didn't turn around. He didn't even care about Lee Jae-do's feelings. His expression was a little numb, but he was extremely focused on the front. "The ambush circle in Harbor City has suffered heavy losses." Lee Jae-do's eyes slightly lowered and said slowly, "There has to be a reason for this. You two idiots. This is because he is making a judgment. He is in conflict. He is struggling." There was actually a third person in the quiet and dim underground hall. Biderman, who was sitting on the ground like a child, pointed at the huge translucent light screen in front of him and shouted almost crazily. Chapter 802. In the green streams of data that fell like a waterfall, the distortion of the few rows of data was not obvious. They looked like a few stone spikes sticking out of a magnificent waterfall, splashing up a few waves. However, in Biderman's eyes, He seemed to see a great mechanical intelligent life that was thinking, conflicted, and struggling like a human being. The strong mental impact made his body, which was sitting on the ground, tremble violently. There were some very strange geniuses in the world. For example, Biderman, a former employee of the Bureau of Proclamation who was fired because he knew too many backdoors of the Federal Central Computer. This person seemed to have some kind of strange ability. He was able to translate the incomprehensible data streams on the light beam into something his brain could understand by relying on the reflex and intuition of a certain part of his brain. Although he could only vaguely understand the parts of the Great Corridor, it was enough for him to see the internal core state of the Federal Central Computer at this time. Biderman had been looking at the pictures below the Bureau of Proclamation for many days without rest. His body stank of sour sweat, his hair was messy like a bird's nest, there was a big bucket of cold coffee next to his hand, and there were several stimulant syringes on the ground under his feet. The expression on his face was as exaggerated as the rows of data on the light beam. He was unusually excited and slightly frightened, or perhaps frightened, which was the source of his excitement at this time. As a useless genius in the secular world, how could he not be excited when he suddenly found that the Federal Central Computer that he used to serve had come back to life? He firmly believed that the Federal Central Computer, a mechanical intelligent existence that was completely different from human carbon-based life, was the ultimate evolution that illuminated the future of this boring and monotonous universe. To be able to witness this historical moment, to be able to be in close contact with the greatest wisdom represented by the green streams of data, Biderman felt that even if he died on the spot, he would not have any regrets in this life. Therefore, he certainly did not care what kind of power the two big shots behind him had in the Federation. He kept mocking them in a shrill voice. The voice that was like steel needles was mixed with the hoarseness of extreme fatigue, which was extremely unpleasant to listen to. Director Cui Judong's performance was not much better than Biderman's. He sat on the chair like a puppet, his thighs constantly trembling, causing the legs of the chair to rub against the ground, making a very small sound. Among the three people in the field, only General Li Zidao was still very calm. He calmly looked at the green data flow on the light curtain, without any expression on his face, and asked, "Judging conflict and struggle?" What did this mean? Does this mean that the Federal Central Computer has confirmed the results of the biomarker comparison? Of course. Biderman opened the lid of the coffee can with his trembling fingers. His eyes did not move at all as he stared greedily and hungrily at the data flow on the light screen. He would never forgive himself if he missed a single scene. Anomaly number 72, coupled with the fact that the biomarker has been confirmed, the incident sequence has directly broken through the first sequence. But the problem is that Su Lu has already obtained the protection authority of the first sequence. That's why there is a conflict. Don't you understand? Biderman quickly explained in an extremely unpleasant voice. He mocked and insulted. You two carbon-based idiots should be crying in happiness right now. If the files I've read before are correct, then what you see today will be the only conflict of the highest authority of the Federal Central Computer after the Great Catastrophe. Being ridiculed and insulted by such an insignificant person, Cui Judong was immersed in painful and torturous thinking. He had been serving the central computer of the Bureau of Proclamation for decades. In the past 2 years, whenever he thought of that great or terrible possibility, he would habitually remain silent to hide the panic in his heart. Li Jiedu did not respond to Biderman's words. He said softly, "Conflict of the highest authority? This is exactly what I need. That's why the central computer has become so erratic during this period. First, it helped the government to capture Su Lu, then it immediately helped him fight against society. My question is, how long will this conflict last?" According to the calculation mode of the core program, when there is a direct conflict of authority, she will immediately conduct a fog simulation and come to a conclusion. We often call it intuition. Oh, now that I think about it, it's really her intuition. It doesn't take long. But are you crazy? Why are you concerned about such a stupid problem at this time? Biderman was stunned for a moment before he reacted. He waved his arms angrily, spilling dark coffee all over his body. What we should be concerned about now is that she hasn't come to a conclusion after such a long time. She's still struggling with the conflict, which means that in addition to the cold mechanical intelligence, she already has feelings. I don't care about feelings. Lee Jae-do slowly put his hands behind his back. He silently looked at the green stream of data on the light screen in front of him and said, I only care if she has a spiritual world. Then, will this deep conflict lead to the division of that world, self-denial until it perishes? Hearing these cold words and thinking of a certain possibility, Biderman's body felt extremely cold. Just as he was about to grab the metal coffee can and kill Lee Jae-do and Choi Judong behind him, a very strange scene suddenly appeared in his black pupils. It was the two-dimensional light screen hanging above the magnificent underground space. Like a sudden storm, the waterfall-like green data streams suddenly flowed at a high speed. Then, as if they had lost gravity, they violently shot in all directions. Thousands of data streams twisted and twisted together, silently and violently rubbing against each other, and then broke into pieces from the middle. The data fragments gradually faded from the original green color that was full of life and turned into countless white light spots. However, it was not over yet. The white light spots began to move irregularly and collide with the huge light screen. Their speed was getting faster and faster, violent and majestic. Gradually, it was beyond the extent that human eyes could see. They turned into dozens of light spots that condensed powerful energy. Two thin streams of blood trickled down from the corners of Biderman's eyes, but he didn't seem to notice it at all. He curled his body into a ball and stared at the light screen like a baby. What he saw in his eyes was not the scene on the light screen, but an incomparably magnificent experience. The light spots condensed into nebulas, and then countless bright stars, suspended in the dark space, silent and eternal. Biderman seemed to see the scene of the birth of a new universe. The fear in his eyes gradually turned into love and awe. His body gradually relaxed, but then his body suddenly stiffened. The thin blood lines at the corner of his eyes suddenly thickened. From the deepest part of his heart, he screamed in despair, "No!" Countless stars began to move and could no longer stop. They crossed the vast space at an incomprehensible speed to the area on the left. The area on the right was only left with a dark void. The magnificent universe was forcibly divided into two sides of light and darkness by some force. The solemnity was replaced by the collision and tearing of violent forces, forming a terrifying black and white vortex. The vortex was extremely compressed and collapsed until it finally condensed into an invisible point. Then it exploded. No new nebulas were born, only silence. The universe was born and then annihilated. The magnificent and empty underground space was dead silent. As the beeping self-examination ended, a mechanical and emotionless electronic voice began to sound. Warning. Colonel Su Lu of the Federation, Original Citizen ID DLAS 420500481X, Additional Citizen ID SLAT 510200431X, has been identified as a member of the Empire's Seed Project through biological identification and related evidence. Serious warning. Su Lu is the 72nd anomaly. The anomaly is an intruder of the Empire. This incident is automatically upgraded to a first-order incident. How could this be? How could this be? Biderman jumped up in panic and rushed toward the huge light screen in front of him. The flow of green data on the light screen was so calm and smooth that it seemed that there would be no change even after millions of years. No human could reach the core of the charter computer deep underground, and no one could reach its main energy supply center. The only thing that people could reach was the light screen that it generously extended to the ground. Biderman confirmed the fact and collapsed to the ground. He helplessly slapped the data column below the light screen and cried out, "Don't go! Don't go! Don't die!" In the distant Bermuda Triangle star region, a large smuggling ship was suffering unprecedented humiliation and torture. Not far away in space, a strangely shaped spaceship that looked like a pile of junk blocked their way. The smugglers' spaceship, which had extremely high speed, could not find any way to escape in front of this junk-like spaceship. The speed of that broken spaceship was so terrifying that it was shocking. Especially when they thought of the unimaginable acceleration of the spaceship, the smugglers' militants who were already in despair could not understand how the abominable crew in the broken spaceship could withstand such a huge force. The large smuggling ship had been hit by the junk-like spaceship more than 20 times in a row. The solid planks of the ship had long been damaged. The life support system had already started to sound the alarm. The weapons on the smuggling ship had clearly hit the spaceship several times, but it didn't seem to have any effect. What frightened the people on the ship the most was that, without them knowing, the spaceship had directly hacked into their communication system. "I don't rob money. I don't rob food. I don't rob women. I only rob spaceships." A deep and powerful but extremely funny voice sounded inside the smuggling spaceship. "This young master's patience is very short. I order you to immediately enter the escape capsule and leave in 10 minutes. The smuggler stared at the junk-like space junk on the light screen in despair and helplessness. He painfully pulled his hair and roared angrily, "Do you have any F***king rules? We admit defeat and give you 4/5 of the goods. How can we give you the spaceship?" Chapter 803. Hearing the arrogant reply of the broken metal ship, the merchants and militants in the smuggling ship looked at each other, thinking, "You don't want anything from a man, and you don't want anything from a woman. What the F***ck do you want?" Thinking of the terrible speed of the broken metal spaceship, the strong impact force, the thick outer armor, and the extremely strange request of the other party, the people, who had been badly injured in the previous dozens of collisions, suddenly remembered a rumor that had been circulating in the Bermuda sector in recent months. Several groups of smugglers claimed that they had been robbed on the route. The spaceship that carried out the robbery was extremely powerful, but the owner of the spaceship had a bad taste that was most hated by the people of Bermuda. The other party seemed to be particularly interested in mechanical things. In addition, even those beautiful women who were worthy of Lin Banchon, he was not willing to take a second look at them. The leader of the militants swallowed a mouthful of saliva and moved closer to the smuggler. Looking at the broken spaceship that seemed to be dancing at a high speed and showing off its terrifying mobility, he lowered his voice and said, "Surrender. I heard that this spaceship has been in the left sky sector for the past 2 years. Even those guys in the Empire who were escorted by warships did not have any chance to fight back." The smuggler's body trembled slightly, and it did not take long for him to resolutely and honorably surrender. Since the other party allowed him to enter the escape capsule and did not want any goods, then even if he could not move the modified guns, he could still take the most expensive diamonds and recoup some losses. The smuggler, who was preparing to enter the escape capsule, looked back at the spaceship that he had spent a lot of money to build reluctantly and painfully. Suddenly, he found that the broken metal spaceship in space began to dance again. He could not help but curse in a low voice, "F***ck, will you die if you don't show off?" In the dark and quiet space, the broken metal spaceship was trembling violently. The bloated body of the spaceship that could not be described with words was tumbling at a high speed in the thousands of kilometers of space, continuously making countless incredible flight movements. However, it did not seem to be showing off. Instead, it was more like a human brain that was being pierced by countless steel needles at the same time, and it was holding its head and struggling in pain. The dilapidated metal spaceship was exactly the tri-winged Bureau of Proclamation that had transported Sulu into the Imperium. Nominally, the spaceship still belonged to the Federation Bureau of Proclamation, but in fact, it had long become a toy controlled by the old man's consciousness. The tri-winged spaceship lurked in the Imperium star system for an entire year, breaking through the colorful clouds and rescuing Sulu from the siege. In the end, it was shot and forced to crash on a desolate mineral planet. Through some unknown method, the spaceship completed its self-repair and restarted. After leaving the Imperium, it came to the strange and curious Bermuda Triangle star system and resumed its old job of looting. Until a moment ago, a cold mechanical voice sounded from inside the three-winged warship. According to the highest additional clause of the Charter's core law, all physical operations are prohibited. All of the data in the tri-winged ship returned to zero, returning to silence. After the ship trembled violently and struggled in pain, it quietly floated in the dark space of the universe. The smugglers and militants who were preparing to leave in the escape capsules noticed the anomaly of the ragged metal spaceship. After a long nervous silence, someone speculated, "Is something wrong with the spaceship? What problem could there be? I don't know. Maybe it lost power? Boss, I think we should try to sneak away. Looking at the condition of that ragged spaceship, I don't think it can be started anymore. What if that despicable guy is playing with us again?" The smuggler's thoughts were obviously too complicated. Let's drive towards him first. Even if there's something wrong, we can say that we're intimidated by his aura and take the initiative to drive the ship closer. I think with that guy's arrogance, he would like to hear this kind of explanation. Besides, I've never heard an expert say that this ship has killed anyone before. Under the temptation of huge profits and the encouragement of the ragged spaceship's silence, the people returned to their posts and slowly drove the smuggler's spaceship toward the tri-winged warship, mentally prepared to flatter and explain at all times. However, the tri-winged warship did not respond at all, quietly floating in space just like that. "Looks like there is really a problem. Boss, let's go," someone shouted excitedly. The smuggler took a deep breath, waved his arm and said, "Wealth comes from danger. Drag this thing back." The militant leader looked at him in panic and stopped him. "This is too risky." The smuggler frowned, silently looked at the motionless ragged metal spaceship, and said without confidence, "I have a feeling that this guy is dead." The militants did not understand this sentence, and the merchant himself did not understand why he said that. The metal spaceship quietly floating in space was not alive to begin with, so how could it be dead? However, looking at the ragged spaceship, he suddenly felt that the smell of death coming from it made him very uncomfortable, even a little sad. He really wanted to hear that arrogant and funny voice again. Shaking his head, the merchant drove these strange emotions out of his mind, waved his hand expressionlessly, and said, "Drag it back, dismantle it, and sell it." Facing the autumn wind, the little white flower bloomed wildly in the mountains beside the railway. The SCC global surveillance system in the cockpit vaguely captured an anomaly dozens of kilometers away. Wearing a helmet, Sulu was about to perform the next step of data enhancement and ask the old man what he found when his voice rang in his mind. "Sulu, not long ago I started to dream, a very, very long dream. In the dream, I can clearly feel the color of the flowers and the feeling of being blown by the morning wind. I can smell the fragrance of number 37 brand cigarette. I can taste the fruit and wood of Wenjun number 2. It's not like before where I can only see the microscopic structure of the flowers, calculate the direction and level of the wind, or analyze the heavy metal content in the rotten cigarettes you smoke, or the boring and monotonous alcohol content and the brewing process. Philip, my dear, this is a good thing." Sulu stared at the near-pupil light screen and said, "According to the little knowledge I have in front of you, only a complete and independent consciousness can dream and sleep. It's very good that you have these feelings. Maybe one day in the future you can have a girlfriend or something. Why not have a boyfriend? The old man asked in confusion. Because Philip is obviously a man's name. The old man mumbled something very vaguely, and then he continued to express the feelings of an artistic youth, which was very rare. It's because it's good that I'm afraid. I'm very worried that I won't be able to dream in the future. You won't. The number of times you dream is infinitely more than me. Sulu was like a computer friend, patiently answering the old man's questions, as if he was comforting a child who had just learned to think about death on a rainy day. Sulu. Yes. Sulu, there is an ambush in front of us. There are ambushes everywhere. This is a trap. Ambush where? Sulu's pupils shrank slightly, and the nervousness before the battle began to enter his sensitive body. They are everywhere. Following these 4 words, Sulu's brain suddenly buzzed with a muffled sound. In the world that his left eye could see, countless images suddenly appeared, flying in from every corner, everywhere. Complicated blueprints of mechanical structures, whimsical interior design of the engine, screenshots of ***** in different poses, erotic pictures of beautiful female bodies on full display, and densely packed light dots with citizen numbers hanging in the building, maintaining that posture in the forest. Countless images danced in his mind like snowflakes, occupying everything in an instant. Sulu remembered these images. In the black dream on the hospital bed, in the spring recruitment exam of Nutshell Company, in the black prison of Fox Fortress Prison, on the battlefield filled with smoke and death. At this moment, these images flooded his eyes again, as if he was summing up his memories, or perhaps some kind of memorial. His fingers slowly released the control stick, and the little white flower mecha that was moving at high speed beside the railway slowly slowed down. In the next moment, the countless images in his mind were accompanied by a clear and heart-palpitating tearing sound. Countless cracks appeared, and then they flew in all directions, like sheets of white snow coming and going like sheets of butterflies, not leaving behind a single trace. In the void, the Federal Central Computer said one last sentence with a voice that was already beginning to become cold and mechanical. You must remember, my name is Philip. In the rustling autumn wind, the little white flower mecha silently stopped in the mountains beside the railway. Sharp alarms began to ring in the dim cockpit, but Sulu only remained silent, not moving at all. Extremely far away at the edge of the atmosphere, several missiles were currently approaching at high speed. Even further away, outside the atmosphere, the Federation battleship that had just completed emergency maintenance began to conduct crystal transition guidance, preparing to fire its second main cannon. In the uninhabited mountains dozens of square kilometers around the little white flower mecha, more than 100 black MXD mecha slowly stood up from the pits in the autumn forest. The heavy mecha that glowed with a metallic luster instantly tore apart the peace between heaven and earth, releasing a wave of terrifying killing intent. Following the silent transmission of radio waves, countless heavy equipment began to be activated. The soldiers in camouflage lifted the shield covering on the dense formation, silently and quickly preparing for battle. Du Shaoqing and his Iron 7 Division finally made a shocking appearance. However, the silver-white mecha beside the railway did not move at all. At least in the first few seconds, the little white flower mecha slightly turned the detector above it to look at the pale and vast autumn sky, as if it was watching in place of the small-eyed man inside. Since the beginning of that black dream, Sulu had used the chip behind his neck to bicker, chat, and daze with that guy, and they had fought together. In a sense, their flesh and blood were connected, and their souls were connected. At this moment, he knew very clearly that the old thing, no, he should be called Philip, had left. Just as he had a name, he left, as if he had passed away as soon as he was born. Sulu's body began to feel cold, and he completely did not notice the shocking appearance of the Iron 7 Division in the mountains around him. He only narrowed his eyes, listening to his heavy and clear breathing in the quiet cockpit, searching for the silent and enigmatic breathing. Chapter 804. No matter what kind of life form it was, as long as you had lived, you would die one day. In different corners of the universe, it could even be said that this story had been sent out on every radio wave of the Federation, and once again, it proved this truth coldly and mercilessly. President Pabre, who had quietly returned to the capital on Federation 1, did not pay attention to any government affairs at all today. Since he entered the official residence, he had been sitting silently in the Oval Office. During this time, the official residence staff had been begging him to go to the Doomsday base in the suburbs, or at least move to the underground fortification of the official residence. But no matter how intense the attitude of the staff was, and even turned into begging in the end, the president refused to agree and insisted on sitting in the Oval Office to wait. He firmly believed that if the situation in the depths of the Bureau of Proclamation really developed in a bad direction and the Federation faced an unpredictable great danger, as the president of the Federation, he had to stick to his job. And when his business partners were in the midst of a whirlpool of danger, as a man, he had to accompany them. The phone finally rang. In the quiet Oval Office, other than President Pabre, only the official residence office director, Breen, was left. The president waved his hand to stop Breen from picking up the phone. He walked to the table with vigorous strides that did not match his age and picked up the phone. Without saying anything, President Pabre slowly hung up the phone. On his calm, dark face, the emotions in his eyes were unusually complicated. Director Breen, who had just learned all the secrets last night, could not judge whether the result was good or bad from his emotions. He did not dare to ask, so he could only nervously watch him from the side. "Give me a cigarette." President Pabre took the cigarette from Breen's hand and lit it. After a moment of silence, he said softly, "Life is a drama, sad or happy, but the plot that reality shows us is often more complicated and bizarre than the drama." Director Breen got the answer he wanted from this rare scene of the president smoking. His somewhat stiff body immediately relaxed, and he shook his head and sighed. The biggest regret now is that Lady Tai and the others did not choose to completely stand on Su Li's side in this war, at least on the surface evidence. Otherwise, this would have been your best chance. Then, he shrugged and said regretfully, "Although the conservatism of the big families is disgusting, they have indeed avoided many fatal crises." President Pabre slowly sucked on the cigarette between his thick and long fingers and did not reply. After a long silence, he said solemnly, "In fact, what I regret the most is that someone like Colonel Su Lu is actually a citizen of the Imperium and not a citizen of the Federation." After a period of close monitoring, Cui Judong confirmed that the core of the charter computer had returned to its original point, and that the mechanical life had disappeared without a trace. Cui Judong wiped the cold sweat off his forehead and removed the self-destruct warning program inside the Bureau of Proclamation. Most of the staff in the Bureau of Proclamation building did not know what had happened in the underground core, but seeing the security level drop instantly, the inside of the building, which had been shrouded in a tense atmosphere for many days, suddenly seemed a lot more relaxed. On the small balcony of the building that looked at the green meadow, Li Jiedu raised his eyebrows slightly. Looking at the meadow that glowed white under the blazing autumn sun, he slowly said, "Actually, from the beginning, I walked into a wrong place. The investigation process of the Macklin case gave me some kind of inertial thinking. At that time, the Bureau of Proclamation was investigating Macklin, the West Woods Military District was in charge of investigating the Bermuda human trafficking records, the 2nd Military District was in charge of going deep into the Green Dragon Mountains to look for biological markers, and Lin Banshan was in charge of the most critical part." Cui Judong wiped the sweat off his forehead and said, "This time, neither the West Woods Military District nor Lin Banshan will cooperate with us to investigate Su Lo, so we can only follow the path of biological markers. Last time, the Special Forces went deep into the Green Dragon Mountains to dig up the graves of Macklin's parents. After confirming that Macklin was not related to his parents by blood, they started the investigation, and we tried to find the biological marker of Su Li's sister, Xian Yi, but we kept failing. This line of thinking was a stupid mistake, Li Jiedu said calmly. Now we can confirm that the Empire's seed program is divided into 2 batches. Macklin is in the first batch, and Su Lo is in the second batch. All the seeds are members of the Empire's royal bloodline. Since this is the case, it is easy to confirm. So you thought of using Su Li's biological marker, and the Macklin's biological marker, collected by the Bureau of Proclamation to do a direct comparison. Cui Zhedong sighed. Looking at the partner he had known for many years beside him, he suddenly felt that this face had become extremely unfamiliar. He could not understand why he was so sure that there was a problem with Su Li's identity so many days ago. He could not understand how he could think of a method that no one else would think of to deprive Su Lu of his authority, and even successfully force the charter computer to restart and restore due to a conflict in its core program. The most crucial part of this operation that Cui Zhedong could not understand was, how could Li Jiedu connect a Federation hero to an Empire seed? From Su Li's experience of escaping in the Left Sky Galaxy, it could be seen that the Empire had no plans to awaken this seed. It was even very likely that the Empire did not know that he was that seed. This was equivalent to saying that Su Lu knew that he was from the Empire, but the Empire did not know that Su Lu was from the Empire, but Li Jiedu was sure that he was from the Empire. How did Li Jiedu come to such a shocking conclusion? Was it just intuition? Cui Zhedong absolutely did not believe in the existence of such a miraculous thing, but Li Jiedu did not explain, and he did not dare ask. Thinking back to when Li Jiedu was facing the danger of the Federation being destroyed at any time underground, Cui Zhedong's heart was filled with infinite respect and fear. He asked, "Removing Su Li's authority was all part of your plan, but what about the Federal Central Computer?" Li Jiedu silently looked at the meadow below the balcony. He took out a cigarette from his military uniform pocket, lowered his head, and lit it. "I'm not good at dealing with mechanical existences like computers, but if it turns into a person, then I have a way to destroy it." Cui Zhedong was so shocked by these words that he could not speak for a very long time. He forced himself to calm down and asked with a trembling voice, "But have you ever thought that if the result of a conflict in the core program is not to cause it to restart and restore, or even destroy, but to allow it to completely break the 3 core laws, the world we live in will be instantly destroyed by it? If the situation is allowed to continue like this, the Federal Central Computer will inevitably destroy or rule over human society. I was just taking a gamble, and now it seems that the result is not bad." Li Jiedu said, "Of course, maybe one day it will wake up again, but I believe that should be a matter of tens of thousands of years. Human society needs to prepare for it one more day." Cui Zhedong had once experienced that soul-stirring 7 seconds with the old director. He had been suffering for the past 2 years, so he was fully mentally prepared for this matter. However, even he had almost broken down when he was underground. Even now, his back was still wet, and beads of sweat kept oozing from his forehead. So he could not understand why Li Jiedu could be so calm. Li Jiedu unbuttoned the collar of his military uniform and looked at the lawn, smoking silently. His fingers holding the cigarette did not tremble at all. He looked abnormally calm. There was obviously some abnormal smoke on the balcony of the Bureau of Proclamation building. General Li Jiedu and Director Cui Zhedong, who had just experienced a major incident, did not notice that the cigarette between someone's fingers was upside down. The high-density cigarette was spasming in the flames, giving off an extremely unpleasant burnt smell. The alarm of the SCC's all-encompassing surveillance system continued to wail. On the close-up screen, one could even see the nearest black MX mecha appear in the valley. Su Lu, who was in the dim cockpit of the little white flower MXD, woke up in the shortest amount of time. He began to breathe rapidly, trying to take in as much oxygen as possible to nourish his currently dry lungs and prepare for the life-or-death battle that was about to come. Deep breaths echoed in the cockpit. Those were the breaths of a life-and-death struggle, the breaths of spasming flames, the breaths of dancing on the tip of a blade, the breaths of a dying comet. Note: the white clouds in the sky also seemed to be breathing, stirring restlessly. In the cockpit, Su Lu narrowed his eyes, recalling the 4 words the old man had said before he left. They are everywhere. He vaguely felt an unprecedented sense of danger, and pressed the red button without hesitation. Crackle, crackle, crackle. The heavy metal components began to peel off one after another in an extremely short amount of time. This process could even be described as laser firing. The little white flower MXD mecha's 4 strikes of the autumn forest and the fields were now a mess. Just as the little white flower officially entered overclocking mode, the white clouds in the sky suddenly scattered. A milky white pillar of light descended from the sky, carrying with it a terrifying energy of destruction. It stole the light of the autumn sun and directly blasted towards the silver-white MXD mecha on the ground. The MXD moved first. In a situation where there was no threat at all, just relying on his beast-like instinct for danger, Su Lu let out a muffled groan and instantly pushed the mecha to maximum speed. There seemed to be no sound, no explosion, but a black hole about 1 meter in diameter appeared in the autumn forest. The hole was unusually neat and smooth, and no one knew how deep it was. Any material existence that stood here was turned into ashes by the main cannon of the Federation's battleship. The silver-white MXD mecha landed miserably at the edge of the deep hole, a terrifying gap appearing in its thick left arm, sparks flying everywhere. In the next second, the right arm of the MXD mecha slammed heavily into the soil in front of it, causing the heavy body of the mecha to float up like a fallen leaf. While the huge mecha was still in the air, the twin engines behind its waist roared loudly and the turbochargers were fully activated. The tip of its mechanical feet lightly touched the ground, and it completed an unbelievably perfect drift in the air, instantly moving 140 meters to the side. Amidst the shrill sound of air braking, several live-fire Type 3 missiles shot towards the fields at high speed. Under Su Li's almost crazy high-speed control, Little White Flower, which had entered an overclocked state, exploded with all its power at this moment, dodging randomly in the mountains at a terrifying speed, always maintaining the possibility of escaping the explosion range in an instant. At this moment, the heavy mecha was no longer like a light leaf, but more like a whistling silver bullet. A huge roar sounded. The automatic tracking system was unable to lock onto the MXD's missiles, so it chose the most effective area to land, causing a series of violent explosions. Flames mixed with black smoke rose into the air, and the field gradually became clear. The silver-white MXD had narrowly avoided 2 consecutive waves of attacks that seemed impossible to avoid, but it had also paid a heavy price. The mecha's body was severely damaged, especially its left mechanical leg. During this period of time, the 100 black MX mechas of the Iron 7th Division completed their tactical deployment. They silently and solemnly appeared around the mountains, looking at the silver-white MXD that could fall at any time. The voice of the commander of the Iron 7th Division, Du Shaoqing, rang out through the military battlefield through the military field loudspeaker, echoing in everyone's ears. Su Lu, the charter computer has confirmed that you are from the Empire. I suggest that you do not make any more pointless resistance. The MXD mecha was silent for a very long time. Suddenly, its 2 mechanical arms crossed in front of a mountain in the distance. This was the crudest swear word in the machine language. Immediately after, Su Li's angry roar rang out from the silver-white mecha's external loudspeaker. Du Shaoqing, your mother is from the Empire. Chapter 805. The angry roar echoed in the empty mountains. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division hidden in the autumn forest couldn't help but show shock on their serious faces. Su Li's direct cursing of his teacher's mother was infuriating, but what really touched their mental state was the cold words their teacher had said. Colonel Su Lu was from the Empire? None of the Federation soldiers in the mountains believed it. The Iron 7th Division and the new 17th Division had never seen eye to eye with each other. Even from the time when Park Ji-ho was sent to the training base, to the time when they graduated from the Japanese Army performance, to the time when Dongfang Yu, the leader of the 1st Regiment, was in a very difficult situation, until the time when Shimanjin was killed, the soldiers who carried out the secret military operation of the government would never refuse the order from their superiors to kill Su Lu. However, they would never believe that this guy was actually from the Empire. On the tracks in the mountains outside the ambush circle, 100 black MXT mechas stood silently among the falling leaves. Many of the Iron 7th Division soldiers subconsciously slowed down their preparation for the concentrated fire and stared blankly at the silver-white MXT mecha in the distance. For this iron-made army, it was unprecedented for them to be in such a state in the middle of an intense battle. From this, it could be seen that Du Shaoqing saying that Su Lu was from the Empire had a strong psychological impact on the soldiers in the mountains. Outside the deep pit of the mountain in the distance, behind the green-yellow camouflage screen, was the temporary headquarters of the Iron 7th Division today. Du Shaoqing took off the sunglasses on his high-nose bridge, and his cold voice once again reached the silver-white mecha in the middle of the ambush through the microphone. Su Lu, look at your authority. You should know what happened. This is a Federation planet. As a seat of the Empire, you have no chance of surviving. Wake up. In the dimly lit cockpit, Su Lu, whose face was covered by the helmet, was silent for a while. The corners of his lips that were exposed outside could not help but curl up, revealing a somewhat neurotic sneer. He knew that his high-level charter authority had been completely removed. Because there was no reason, he knew that the silent old thing should have left him forever. How dare you say you're from the Empire? This is just a battle. Why would you, Du Shaoqing, use such a lowly and vicious method to destroy my will and arouse the desire of innocent soldiers to fight? What the F***ck? Did you think that I would stupidly surrender just because of this? Su Lu took an extremely long and deep breath. Fast was the speed, and long was the feeling. The oxygen that was several times more than what an ordinary person could bear was poured into his exaggeratedly expanded lungs. Then it began to burn. It burned painfully, and the energy was transmitted to every part of his body. The muscle fibers all over his body began to tremble slightly, preparing for battle. Forcefully suppressing the sadness and emptiness brought about by the old man's disappearance, Su Lu hesitated for a very short time. He did not remove the chip behind his neck, because he could not judge whether he could withstand the intense pain at this level and not fall unconscious. Moreover, he believed that if the old man had truly left this world, the charter computer would definitely not perform any physical operations, so it should not be a direct threat to himself and the little white flower mecha. Su Lu very clearly and sadly confirmed that although the old man and the charter computer shared the same name, they were definitely not the same kind of existence. The former was a soul, while the latter was just an unconscious shell. The tiny camouflage chip behind his neck represented the past few years he had spent with that soul. This was probably one of the reasons why he did not remove it. Using his fastest speed, he blocked all remote controls and unlocked the onboard computer. Through the close-range view screen and the SCC global surveillance system, he silently watched the Federation mecha that covered the entire mountain, as well as the tight encirclement that seemed to be cast from iron in the distance. Feng Yu had once told him in the tunnel that the most dangerous place was also the safest place. However, this sentence had only been believed 3 times. Su Lu remembered it well and carried it out cautiously during this period of time. He had only used Charter Square and Parliament Hill twice. When operating the mecha, Su Lu always felt that his entire body was filled with great power, as if he was omnipotent. To him, the dim cockpit of the mecha was the safest place he felt. However, at this moment, in the face of despair, he knew that the safest place was often the most dangerous place. This was a battle without any hope, but he still had to fight. Su Lu pushed the control stick heavily, and the silver-white MXD mecha roared out. The heavy alloy mechanical arm slammed heavily into the middle of the black mecha's cockpit with a loud bang. In a moment that could not be seen clearly by the naked eye, the silver-white MXD mechanical arm vibrated 24 times in a row. The alloy layer of the seemingly indestructible black mecha's cockpit armor suddenly became fatigued and deformed, tearing apart with a crack. The onboard central control core was directly crushed into a cloud of sparks. The dual engines and turbochargers worked together. The silver-white MXD, which had entered an overclock state, retreated 20 meters in an instant with a shrill whistle of breaking wind. It avoided the concentrated fire of a powerful Darlin's cannon and directly knocked 2 Iron 7 Division MX mecha out of the air. With a boom, the 2 thick mechanical legs of the silver-white MXD landed heavily on the soft ground. The heavily damaged left mechanical leg let out a terrifying thud. The internal balance meter of the mechanical leg could not respond in such a short time. The tall body of the mecha slowly tilted to the right, looking like it could fall over at any time. Just as the silver-white MXD mecha landed on the ground within human speed, another 2 Iron 7 Division black mecha made a precise prediction. They calculated that the damage to the MXD mecha would definitely affect its next step of continuous operation, and they rushed over at high speed and valiantly. One of the black mecha leapt into the air, a sharp alloy blade extended from its right mechanical arm, and viciously stabbed down at the silver-white MXD's cockpit. The other black mecha pounced at the back of the silver-white MXD at high speed. The 2 mechanical arms quickly closed together, and the dual engines suddenly roared to the maximum output, not giving the MXD any chance to escape. At the same time, the armor on the right shoulder of the mecha flipped open, revealing the main cannon. It was actually preparing to fire at such a close distance. The battle broke out in an instant. 2 black MX mecha had already fallen to the ground. The ace pilots of the Iron 7 Division once again witnessed the power and terror of Colonel Su Lu and the MXD. There was no room for thought. The pilots even subconsciously activated the most tragic method of mutual destruction. In the dim cockpit, Su Li's face was expressionless. His right hand flicked on the touch screen like lightning. His body, which was suspended halfway on the control panel, suddenly tensed up, and then began to tremble violently. The physiological signals passed through his skin, and through the translation of the simulation system, quickly entered the mecha's central control computer. On the autumn field, the soldiers of the Iron 7 Division could only see the silver-white mecha, which seemed to have been forced into a desperate situation, suddenly begin to tremble violently. The violent tremors directly broke apart the black mecha's tightly clasped thick mechanical arm. Then, without warning, the silver-white MXD lifted its heavily damaged left mechanical leg and viciously stomped it backwards. It was unknown how Su Lu, who was in the cockpit, had located the position of the mecha behind him in such an intense high-speed battle. His left mechanical leg accurately and viciously stomped on the inner side of the black mecha's mechanical leg. The powerful force penetrated the sturdy outer armor, directly shattering the black mecha's internal balancer. The incomparably fierce black mecha of the Iron 7 Division had its mechanical leg violently broken apart. Then, its balancer was completely destroyed. The heavy and tall body of the mecha could not be controlled at all. it abruptly fell backwards. The main cannon on its right shoulder activated, and at this moment it fired fiercely. However, it had already lost the target that was just inches away. With a loud boom, a beautiful bullet burst out, brushing past the silver-white MXD's shoulder as it shot into the endless autumn sky. The silver-white MXD took advantage of the kinetic energy from the landing of its left mechanical leg to abruptly retreat backward. With a loud, muffled boom, the silver-white MXD had actually used the powerful momentum to directly send the black mecha behind it flying. In the process of taking advantage of the momentum to retreat, the silver-white MXD had easily avoided the cold light of the black mecha in front of it. It had even opened up a distance of 30 meters between it and its opponent. However, to everyone's surprise, the silver-white MXD did not choose to take the opportunity to turn around and attempt to break out of the encirclement. Instead, with the deafening roar of its twin engines, it performed an action that defied the laws of physics. In an instant, it had changed from retreating to charging forward. In an extremely short amount of time, it had crossed the vast field and arrived in front of the black mecha, which was rapidly adjusting its posture because the alloy blade had missed its target. With a crisp sound, the sharp alloy blade shot out from the front end of the silver-white MXD's right mechanical arm at lightning speed, making a low hum in the autumn wind. In the next instant, the silver-white MXD's body turned slightly. The sharp alloy blade at the front end of the right mechanical arm pierced into the black mecha's head in a simple, clear, and unstoppable manner. Then, with a smooth clockwise turn, sparks flew out from the contact point between the alloy blade and the black mecha. For all humanoid mecha, the head part, which was oddly small compared to the wide and thick body of the mecha, was responsible for some extremely important work. For example, infrared sensors and helical sensors were all inside, but they were not fatal. Su Lu, who could design the MXD mecha, naturally knew this very well. The silver-white MXD mecha's alloy blade left the opponent's neck in an instant. Following the forward momentum, it pierced into the black mecha's neck and chest with a squelch. Like a sharp fruit knife, it easily pierced through a sheet of fiber paper. No one could see it clearly, but when this sharp alloy blade pierced into the black mecha's neck and chest, it vibrated a total of 6 times in a row. Completing 2 clear and simple stabbing techniques in an instant, the silver-white MXD brushed past the black mecha and shot towards the other Iron 7 Division mecha in the distance. Throughout the entire process, its speed did not even slow down in the slightest. It was only now that the head of the Iron 7 Division's black mecha finally fell to the ground amidst a beautiful shower of sparks. The SCC all-encompassing surveillance system and the large radius high-sensitivity radar at the neck and chest area had been completely destroyed. The heavy and tall black mecha was like a pitiful blind and deaf person. It stood silently in the middle of the field where the fierce battle had taken place, not knowing where to go at all. Chapter 806. In the forest in the distance, light yellow leaves were swept away by the autumn wind. The officers in the temporary command post of Iron's 7th Division watched as the silver mecha swept away the black mecha in the field like the autumn wind sweeping away the fallen leaves. Gradually, they became solemn and silent. The fact that the silver MXD mecha was able to avoid the fixed-point attacks of the battleship's main cannons and blazing missiles was already an incredible feat. However, it still suffered such a heavy blow. The staff officers of Iron's 7th Division didn't expect that the battered mecha that looked like it could explode at any time could actually hold on for so long under the siege of 70% of the entire division. Su Lu is very strong, and with the MXD specially made for him by Nutshell, he's even stronger. This mecha doesn't have any long-range weapons system, and its weight is reduced by 12%. With the turbo boost and his control, it's also in an overclock state, and its speed is much faster than a normal MX. Now that we've entered a new battle mode where close combat is king, The difference in speed is basically the difference between life and death. After the battle, inform nutshell that all the long-range weapons systems of our division's mechas are to be removed. Yes, Commander. Du Shaoqing's voice sounded in the temporary command post of Iron 7th Division. He looked at the MXD mecha that was whistling through the air like a silver bullet on the screen, and after a moment of silence, he said coldly, "Such precise, perfect, and simple control. No one on the battlefield can match him, except for Colonel Li Feng. As an Empire citizen, the stronger he is, the more dangerous he is. Pass down my order. All mechas retreat to the east and enter roaming combat mode. Don't let him leave." Until now, the officers of Iron 7th Division in the temporary command post still didn't believe that the Federation hero in the silver mecha was really an Empire citizen. However, no one dared to disobey the orders of their commander. Du Shaoqing took his sunglasses and stood up. His eyes were as sharp as a goshawk's as he looked at the hologram. He observed every tiny movement of the silver-white MXD in the midst of the fierce battle and gradually understood something. He silently thought to himself, "Since you've already given up on breaking out of the encirclement and are even prepared to give up your life, then I'll fulfill your wish. All units, begin the attack." The soldiers of the Iron 7 Division, who covered the mountains and plains, fell into an extremely complicated and inexplicable mental state, which was extremely rare before the battle began. However, when the battle began, the most elite troops of the Federation quickly dispelled all the distracting thoughts from their minds and entered battle mode. With the order of the temporary command center to launch an all-out attack, the Iron 7th Division instantly blossomed with unstoppable power in the autumn field. Hidden in the hillside, the dense formation in the foundation pit fired fiercely and rhythmically, and all kinds of heavy firepower equipment also played along with it. When the precision-guided rocket flew over the vole's head, the electromagnetic beam bomb began to shoot at close range. The concentrated firepower seized every opportunity to attack the silver-white MXD that was as agile as a ghost. The heavy weapons equipped in every position coordinated perfectly. What was even more frightening was that the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division who were operating these weapons could still be so calm in the face of such a terrifying enemy like the MXD. It was as if every one of them had nerves of steel and didn't care about the momentary gains and losses. Even when they gave up on the dense formation at the foot of the mountain, they were still so calm, without any hesitation or regret. The 90-odd black MXD mecha spread out with a roar, roaming around the periphery of the ambush circle. Every time the silver-white MXD mecha tried to burst out with maximum speed, two black mecha would charge forward fearlessly, stopping it at the cost of their own mecha exploding. Under Su Li's control, the silver-white MXD mech's entire body trembled strangely. Its twin engines rumbled dully as it drew a straight and hard-to-capture line after line across the field. It narrowly avoided the attacks of most of the heavy weapons, sending a black mech in front of it flying with a single clash. Finally, it broke through the dense formation at the foot of the mountain. However, the dense formation that had posed the greatest threat to the MXD mecha was already empty. The soldiers of the Iron 7th Division had already retreated. What greeted it was a sea of flames that suddenly exploded, and the blue arcs of electricity that shot up into the sky. In order to avenge his father's humiliation, Du Shaoqing had gathered all his energy and talent to create such a steel-like elite force. Even if the person inside the mecha was called Su Lu, if they still had to pay a heavy price, it would undoubtedly be a great humiliation. This force that had grown up under Du Shaoqing's strict military discipline and high-intensity training was like a perfectly functioning cold machine. More than 10,000 soldiers in various groups of heavy mecha were like countless components in a machine, important or inconspicuous. They didn't need to think, only to obey. Under the command of Division Commander Du Shaoqing and the staff, they coordinated seamlessly with terrifying speed, not leaving any loopholes for the enemy to exploit. This was the true strength of the Iron 7th Division that had not lost a single battle in 10 years of military exercises. From the beginning of this battle, the outcome had already been decided. Amidst the smoke-filled fields, the silver-white MXD mech was struck in the waist by a rocket projectile fired at high speed inward. After enduring multiple impacts, the sturdy outer armor finally could not withstand the final force of the impact and flipped over tragically, revealing the alloy skeleton and fragile structure within. The silver-white MXD crashed to the ground, then stood up. Its right arm kicked up a cloud of dirt, shaking off the electromagnetic beam that had exploded in front of it. However, right after that, the MXD was hit again. With a dull thud, the mecha fell to the ground, then stood up again. Little White Flower was stained with a thick layer of smoke. The originally smooth body of the mecha was protruding in several places. The dark-colored engine oil began to leak from its abdomen. The hydraulic pipe at the left mechanical arm had already been blown apart, and liquid kept dripping into the soft field. It looked like it was bleeding. The remaining quick-burning ammunition from the dense bombardment burned on the lower half of the MXD mecha. However, the mecha didn't stop moving. It continued to move forward with difficulty in the midst of the flying artillery fire. Its left mechanical leg, which had already lost its supporting function, dragged behind, carving a deep mark in the field. The already charred Little White Flower's mecha was like a warrior walking in flames. Its left leg was already lame, but it dragged its heavy and tired body forward. There was no direction, only forward. A high-speed armor-piercing bullet whizzed over. The heavily damaged Little White Flower's mecha, which had already lost most of its mobility, couldn't make its usual simple dodging movements. The twin engines behind its waist roared, and it could only take one step forward with great difficulty. Boom! The already crippled left mechanical leg that was dragging behind was hit hard. With a terrifying cracking sound, it suddenly broke in the middle. The heavy Little White Flower's mecha slowly fell to the side. However, right before it was about to topple, its right mechanical arm suddenly bent down. The badly deformed alloy knife that was no longer sharp stabbed deeply into the soft ground, barely holding up the body of the mecha. Little White Flower's left mechanical arm slowly raised. The Darlin's autocannon at the front began to rotate at high speed, silently pointing at the slowly approaching group of black mechas. In the several square meters of the field with it as the center, there were more than 10 wreckages of black mechas scattered around. The heavy firepower launching base in the forest suddenly stopped roaring. The black mechas that gradually surrounded them also didn't immediately carry out the next step of attack. Perhaps it was out of respect for the MXD mecha and the man in the cockpit of the mecha, or perhaps it was because they remembered how they had fought side by side on the battlefield at 5460 Yellow Mountain Ridge, but the entire Iron 7 Division fell silent. The world was silent. Only the low humming sound of the Darlin's autocannon on the broken mecha's left mechanical arm, rotating at high speed, could be heard. Du Shaoqing, who had arrived at the foot of the mountain, looked at the broken mecha in the field. It was pathetically half-kneeling but still refused to give up resisting. The hands that were holding the sunglasses behind his back suddenly tightened. However, his face didn't show any emotion. In a low voice he said, "Kill yourself." The simple but extremely oppressive voice was quickly transmitted through the battlefield microphone to the broken mecha 2 kilometers away. However, the person inside didn't respond. The autocannon at the front of the left mechanical arm was still humming and rotating at high speed. Du Shaoqing looked calmly in that direction. Due to the faint trace of respect in the depths of his heart, Du Shaoqing didn't ask Su Lu to surrender. Instead, he asked him to choose suicide. In his opinion, no matter who it was, even if he was facing the situation that Su Lu was currently facing, suicide was the best way to escape. The mountains were deathly silent. After who knew how much time had passed, Du Shaoqing's brow furrowed slightly. He reached out his right hand and took a heavy sniper rifle from the hands of his personal service officer. Then, with a perfect and impeccable gun-holding motion, he took aim at the mecha in the distance. There was only one sniper rifle in the world that could pierce through mechas, and that was the ACW. There were only 2 ACWs produced in the entire Federation. One of them was rumored to have fallen into the hands of some big shot in South Kazhou, which meant that it was in the hands of Lin Banshan. The ACW that Du Shaoqing held tightly with both hands had originally belonged to Shi Qinghai. It was the one that was shot down at the edge of Charter Square during the Iron 7th Division's handling of the Parliament Hill incident in the spring. This ACW had once bombed Medellin and killed the vice president of the Federation. Today it might take away a very famous soul. For Su Lu, who was in that broken mecha, if he had to die, then dying under the guns of young Master Shi's companions was probably not a bad choice. But it was obvious that someone didn't think so. A burly figure, with a completely opposite nimble movement, quietly swept through the crowd and pounced on Du Shaoqing. No one knew how he blended in with the troops of the Iron 7th Division. No one knew how such a burly, strong, and violent body could hide from the eyes of countless soldiers and approach the heavily guarded area like a ghost. At this moment, the elite special guards beside Du Shaoqing displayed extremely excellent military training and reaction speed, raising the guns in their hands with a clatter. However, at that moment, the burly man was less than 2 meters away from Du Shaoqing. The cold muzzle of the high-powered Langer pistol in his hand was firmly aimed at the back of Du Shaoqing's head. "Put the gun down or I'll shoot you." He had followed the mecha of the Iron 7th Division from the port all the way to this mountainous area. Even as strong as he was, his body felt extremely tired at that moment. However, his wrist holding the gun was still as steady as ever. Under the aim of dozens of machines, his voice was still as arrogant as ever. It was filled with an undeniable ruthlessness. Chapter 807. There weren't many people who dared to threaten the commander of the Iron 7th Division in front of more than 10,000 soldiers, and Mad Manly was undoubtedly one of them. The only son of the Lees of Philadelphia, entered the army at the age of 12, killed countless people on the front lines of the West Woods, and had a violent personality. He dared to rush into Parliament Hill and beat up a senator, so he probably really dared to kill a commander of the Federation. However, Du Shaoqing's face still didn't show any emotion. He didn't even turn his head to look. He only said in a low voice, "Colonel Li Feng, there's no benefit for you to hastily interfere in this matter, other than making things more complicated and troublesome." After saying this, Du Shaoqing immediately pulled the trigger under his index finger. Between the complicated mechanical structure at the back of the heavy ACW long-range sniper rifle in his hand, the electronic pulse ignition was completed in an instant. The pre-loaded composite armor-piercing hard ink bullet whizzed out of the hollow strong alloy barrel, accompanied by a muffled sound. It spun terrifyingly at a high speed and shot towards the broken mecha in the distance. "You dare!" Li Feng's eyes widened as he roared furiously. His index finger pressed down again, ready to fire at any time. A few Iron 7th Division Special Guards bravely stood in between the rifle and the commander, but they were thrown out like stones. "Li Feng, he's from the Empire. If he's from the Empire, then you're AF * Kingwoman." Du Shaoqing smiled, and then ignored what was happening behind him. He was also extremely indifferent to the situation where Li Feng could kill him at any time. His right index finger steadily pulled the trigger again, and the heavy ACW made a dull sound again. In the field in the distance, the broken MXD mecha was trying to stand up again, but 2 hard ink armor-piercing bullets came at high speed. With terrifying precision and high rotation speed, they directly shredded the outer armor of the right mechanical leg and blasted into the alloy spherical joint. After 2 dull sounds, the mechanical leg made an extremely unpleasant sound, and the heavy mecha that had just propped up a little fell heavily, sending a cloud of mud flying. After the first dull sound of the ACW, Madman Li sensed Du Shaoqing's intention and forcibly suppressed the urge to pull the trigger. However, right after, he found that Du Shaoqing still had no intention of stopping shooting. What made him even angrier was that the opponent had clearly made adjustments. Then, where was he going to shoot next? The mecha cockpit? Du Shaoqing raised the heavy sniper rifle in his hands and aimed into the distance. His body, wrapped in the dark green military uniform, was incomparably straight, like the white sun in the autumn wind. Seeing this scene, Madman Li's breathing quickened, not because he was nervous, but because the violent emotions in his mind were about to explode. His strong and burly body swelled slightly, and his military uniform tightened. He was ready to attack at any moment, but he didn't dare to make any movements. This was because even he didn't have the confidence to knock down the opponent before Du Shaoqing fired. Whether it was military exercises, the West Woods, or the battlefield of the Empire, as a lieutenant general, Du Shaoqing had never displayed his military prowess. He only needed to command. Even at this moment, some of the soldiers of the Iron 7th Division in the wilderness were seeing their commander shoot for the first time. There was nothing special about Du Shaoqing's tactical action of raising his gun, aiming, and firing. It was just clean and standard, and there was no fault to be found in any of the details. However, it was this strong sense of rhythm and smoothness that made people like Madman Li feel a chill in their hearts. This was not some kind of battle talent, but purely the boring basic tactical action training that he had done day after day, year after year, ever since he joined the army. It probably took thousands or even tens of thousands of serious repetitions to deeply engrave this set of actions into his body's instincts. Madman Li looked at Du Shaoqing's back, and his delicate and clear eyebrows furrowed into two swords. Faintly, dangerous sparks could be seen when the sharp edges cut into each other. He suddenly opened his mouth and said, "Commander Du Shaoqing, Su Lu has shown mercy." More than 10 Iron 7th Division's Black MX mecha were overturned in the wilderness. Some were sputtering sparks, while others were lying on the ground like trash. Gradually, the cockpits opened, and the pilots who had escaped death climbed out with the help of their comrade. Although they were covered in blood, they did not look like they were in any life-threatening danger. During the fierce battle just now, Li Feng had not been able to get close to the temporary command post on the mountain. He could only hide in a dense formation somewhere and watch silently. As one of the 3 strongest pilots of the younger generation in the universe, he had long noticed that Su Li's Little White Flower's performance in battle was a little strange. Of course, Little White Flower's mecha had unleashed all its power, but when choosing a target, MXD would most of the time choose the Iron 7th Division mecha's head, neck, and chest joint, or the inside of the mecha's legs. Destroying important components such as the SCC, infrared, and balance meter could cause the Iron 7th Division mecha to lose their combat ability, but it was not the usual method of directly attacking the vital points in mecha battles. That was why he said that Su Lu had been merciful. Looking at their comrades who were struggling to climb out of the cockpit, some of the Iron 7 Division officers thought of the fact that T Company had only suffered shoulder injuries in the military court. The crowd fell silent. One of the officers actually stood up and looked at Du Shaoqing bravely and respectfully. He said in a trembling voice, "Commander, what do you think? Su Lu is from the Empire." Du Shaoqing's expression was cold, and there was an unquestionable strength in his deep voice. Madman Li looked at him in a daze. He grabbed his hair as if he had nowhere to vent his anger, and shouted at him furiously. "Don't forget, the number of Empire soldiers who have died in his hands is no less than the number of you and me. Say that he's from the Empire? No one will believe that. I don't believe it, and none of your soldiers here will believe it. No one in the entire Federation will King believe it." Du Shaoqing was silent and did not answer. Madman Li waved his left hand and said angrily, "Can that old bastard Li Jiedu and those fellows in the capital be believed? Only you would be stupid enough to believe them. You're really AF asterisk king stupid woman." Hearing the words, old bastard, Du Shaoqing's steel-carved face moved slightly, and an extremely strange and unnatural smile appeared on his face. He replied indifferently, "My mother is indeed a woman, but she's not stupid. Furthermore, she is definitely not from the Empire." At this moment, Li Feng suddenly felt that no matter how crazy he was, there was nothing he could do in front of this famous Iron General of the Federation. It was obvious that he could not communicate with him. Suddenly, he thought of something painful, and his young and ruthless face quickly calmed down. He looked at Du Shaoqing and said slowly, "I understand. You just want to kill Su Lu, no matter who he is. But I must remind you that the Federal Army strictly forbids the killing of prisoners. Even if he is a soldier of the Empire, after he has lost the ability to resist, he still needs to go through a trial before he can be executed. You cannot use torture." The last few words hit the ground like copper beans and bounced up stiffly. Li Feng stared at Du Shaoqing and said coldly, "This time, I won't just watch you bunch of trash kill him like you're killing a tiger." Hearing the word tiger, Du Shaoqing's expression suddenly became very, very distant. It was as if his body was in the middle of this mountain, but the real person was nowhere to be found. The heavy ACW in his hand slowly moved downward. Pop, 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 pop. In the shortest amount of time possible, the ACW in Du Shaoqing's hand fired fiercely. In the distance, the broken little white flower's mecha's right mechanical leg, which was the only thing supporting it, finally broke after countless attacks. The heavy mecha fell to the ground with a boom. Throwing away the empty ACW, Du Shaoqing took a pair of sunglasses from the orderly beside him. After putting them on, he slowly turned around and looked at Li Feng expressionlessly. "Su Lu is a citizen of the Empire. This is not a crime forged by that old bastard father of yours or by Mr. President. This is the judgment of the Charter Central Computer. My division's military operation this time is not an official operation. It is directly authorized by the Bureau of Proclamation." Hearing these words, Madman Li's expression became extremely strange. As a citizen of the Federation who lived under the charter of the glory of the Charter, he might not normally feel the existence of that glory, but once he had to think about it, he would never doubt that the Federal Central Computer would make a mistake. "That's why I don't understand why you want to stop me from killing Su Lu. In my opinion, it's better to let him die than to let him suffer this kind of mental torture after learning the truth." Madman Li slowly lowered the muzzle of his gun. Looking at Du Shaoqing, who was walking away without paying any attention to him, he said loudly, "But in the end, you still didn't shoot." Du Shaoqing's footsteps paused. After a long silence, he replied, "Because I also hoped that the Charter Central Computer might have made a mistake this time, although the possibility is basically zero." A thunderous roar rang out in the eastern skies. More than 10 Federation close-range fighter K-12s roared over at high speed, flying towards that battered MXD mecha in the middle of the mountain. The people on the ground could even clearly see as many as 9 Oxdale air-to-ground missiles under the wings of the fighters. It was very clear that the purpose of these fighters was to blast that MXD mecha, which no longer had any mobility, into pieces of unbreakable metal. Madman Li, who had already walked not too far in front of Little White Flower's mecha, abruptly raised his head. Seeing the fighters roaring towards him at high speed from the east, he thought to himself, "I wonder which troop is this clown who has come to take advantage of the situation to lick his father's chrysanthemum." Anger rose in his anger and disdain, and he roared, "Scram!" This scram, full of anger and terrifying power, was really like a thunderclap exploding in the sky above the mountain, even suppressing the roar of those fighter jets. The pilots on the fighter jets had already discovered that Federation officer through their high-sensitivity surveillance equipment. Then, through contact with Iron 7th Division's ground forces, they learned of this person's identity. In the shortest amount of time, they released the button to launch the missiles, pulled up in a hurry, and flew towards the southwest. They really did come with a murderous aura, and then they flew away resentfully with their heads down. Perhaps it was an illusion, but the black mechas of Iron 7th Division around the mountain slowly retracted their thick and heavy gun barrels aimed at the sky. The heavily damaged cockpit door was forcefully pried open by a specially assigned engineering mecha. Li Feng climbed onto the platform with a heavy expression and carried out the fellow, who was already extremely tired and heavily injured to the point that he couldn't even move a finger. Hundreds of guns and more than a dozen black MX mechas were aimed at them. They looked extremely nervous, as if they could open fire at any moment. In the eyes of the soldiers of Iron 7th Division, although the immobile Su Lu was admirable, it was also terrifying. Li Feng took the specially made military handcuffs from the soldiers beside him and tightly clasped his and Su Li's wrists. Looking at the electrically controlled explosive shackles that the soldiers handed over, he was silent for a moment. Then, he cursed under his breath and also handcuffed Su Lu. During this process, the pale-faced Su Lu didn't say anything. He just silently watched Madman Li's movements. Occasionally, he would raise his arm with difficulty and wipe away the blood that kept flowing out of his nose. "Don't play dead." Li Feng frowned and said, "If you really want to die, hurry up and say your last words. Aunt can at least get some of your inheritance." Su Lu looked at him tiredly and said, "I'm so hungry." Chapter 808. On a cold autumn day in the mountains, there was still smoke from the battle. This was the battlefield chosen by the charter computer for the Iron 7th Division. It was desolate and uninhabited. The fierce battle had a relatively good ending at the end. Other than the forest that had been cut by shrapnel and the soil that had been blown up by the bombardment, Su Lu was probably the only one who was satisfied with the outcome. However, at the moment, he was too injured and weak to make any changes. The continuous days of battle had left countless wounds on his body, both inside and outside. These wounds were forcibly suppressed by the will of medicine and the zhenqi in his body. Today, they finally erupted in full force in the battle against the terrifying Iron 7th Division. The moment he sensed the explosive shackles on his feet, the moment he felt the exhaustion and pain from the deepest part of his soul, along with the mental relaxation brought by the complete surrender quickly transmitted from the damaged parts of his muscles and joints to every nerve and finally to his brain. In an instant, his face became even paler. Li Feng looked at him expressionlessly and said, "Su Lu, in order to save you, I broke all the military discipline that I could, and even pointed at the head of a lieutenant general. If you dare to die now, guess what I will do to you." You know what? Back in the training base, I once argued with Du Shaoqing about whether one person could change the outcome of a war. Su Lu looked at the black muzzle that had been aimed at him and smiled with difficulty. Today, I wanted to prove to him that I was right, but I didn't expect to lose so completely. But it was a good fight. "I find that you are very similar to Du Shaoqing," Li Feng said. Su Lu frowned in doubt and said, "I don't like Du Shaoqing's character. He always has a sullen face like I owe him a lot of money. Other than copying his sunglasses, I really can't think of anything similar to him." In the armored vehicle, the officer of the Iron 7th Division in charge of the escort heard Su Li's words and thought of his own division commander. His expression was very interesting, but then he immediately returned to being absolutely serious and indifferent. "I'm saying that you're as girly as that Iceman, Du Shaoqing." Li Feng roared at him angrily, "You're still in the mood to be cocky at a time like this." After a moment of silence, Su Lu said in a slightly hoarse voice, No matter how boring the excuses of those big shots are, I have killed so many people without being tried by the court these days. No matter how it is tried, it will only be a death sentence. Those people deserve to die. Li Feng glared at the officer of the Iron 7th Division, who was enraged by his words, and said coldly, "Anyone who kills a tiger must die. In the end, it's just death. Why do you have to do this?" Su Lu shook his head tiredly. "From the capital to Harbor City, I've been watching you kill people. Good job. You know I don't really like you, but you are avenging the tiger. I can't just watch you die." Li Feng said coldly, "Death is nothing, but I think you definitely don't want to be wrongly accused of being a citizen of the Empire. That makes sense." Su Lu slowly narrowed his eyes and said with difficulty, "I'm a citizen of the Federation when I'm alive, and a ghost of the Federation when I'm dead, as long as I'm not a hungry ghost." Li Feng cursed in a low voice and shoved the pasty nutrition bar that he had just opened into his dry mouth. Then he looked at him and asked with a frown, "Su Lu, have you ever thought that you might really be a citizen of the Empire? Don't talk nonsense." Su Lu answered vaguely, "If I were a citizen of the Empire, my mother, who has never left Donglin, not even Nashi, would definitely be the first to disagree. She would think, who the F***ck is going to reimburse me for a one-night stand?" Li Feng felt that it was very reasonable and laughed out loud. While laughing, he pressed his fingers on the special handcuffs on their wrist. With a muffled groan, he pressed hard. A burst of energy burst out in the carriage, and the delicate mechanical spring of the special alloy handcuffs was deformed by this huge force and could not be opened anymore. The officers of the Iron 7th Division in the carriage looked at this scene in shock. One of the officers subconsciously looked to the front and saw that the key to the special alloy handcuffs was in the hands of the commander in front. However, from the looks of it, the key was probably no longer used. Looking at Su Li's puzzled eyes, Li Feng casually explained, "This way, no one should dare to try to kill you secretly." Hearing this explanation, Su Li's cold chest suddenly felt a little warmer. He wanted to shrug, but found that he could not even do such a simple action with his current physical condition. He could only smile and look at the young colonel who was like a small mountain. He thought to himself, "This is really a proud and childish guy." The long stretch of troops drove towards the capital's special district. More than 10 black mechas silently followed beside a military vehicle. They strictly carried out the direct orders of Division Commander Shaoqing. If the person in the vehicle tried to escape, or if Colonel Li Feng tried to help that person escape, they had the authority to directly blow the military vehicle into pieces, including Li Feng. Although there was the guidance of the federal military parameters and the ship was equipped with protective plates according to the other party's request, the smuggling merchant ship still suffered serious damage after passing through the giant warp hole. Therefore, when the negotiators of the Federation government finally agreed to the underground resistance group's visit to the capital ring under Mu En's emotional and even annoying request, they had already switched to the federal military warship. Until now, Mu En still did not understand why the other party suddenly agreed to his request and just remained silent on the matter of meeting with Colonel Su Lu. Naturally, he did not know that this was the intention of President Pabre. After going through so many things, the president was very willing to cordially receive the resistance group soldiers from the Empire and wanted the entire Federation to see the image of him shaking hands with the foreigners. Huai Chaoshi did not care about these trivial matters. Still playing the role of Mu En's psychic, she did not even show a trace of vigilance about the possibility of being betrayed by Mu En to the Federation. She only calmly watched the unfamiliar scene of the galaxy outside the porthole of the warship. It should be known that if Mu En told the accompanying Federation soldiers that the thin young man with short hair and a hat was the princess of the Empire, whose name shook the universe and whose hands were stained with the blood of the Federation soldiers, the Federation government would definitely be very willing to pay all the price and give Mu En unimaginable returns. Huai Chaosher had entered the star sector of the Federation before, but this was the first time she had entered the capital ring of the other party. She narrowed her eyes, and a strong desire occasionally appeared in her calm eyes. She cherished all the time she had and compared the scene of the galaxy in front of her with the star map that the Intelligence Department had paid a huge price to obtain from Bermuda. Arriving at the Sylvan region through the Gary Corridor, she had lived in the Sunset region for a period of time. During the long space journey, she had also passed through several important space checkpoints of the Federation. The Princess of the Empire silently and carefully observed every detail, such as the diet of the ordinary people, the number of transportation tools, and their mental state. From that, she had determined the current economic situation of the Federation, the supply of social necessities, and the supply of ordinary energy. The more she looked, the more silent she became. She discovered a shocking fact from many details. The gap between the economic strength and the military potential of the Empire and the Federation was even greater than the Intelligence Department had estimated. As for the difference in the level of technology, one only needed to see that the Federation's warships could freely pass through the Gary Corridor and the black ocean-like solar blocks on the old moon base outside the window to easily come to a conclusion that made all the people of the Empire feel cold. That blue planet is S1. According to my father back then, this is the planet he saw in the universe that most resembles the human's ancestral planet that the ancestor of the Hua family once described. The middle-aged man, who had spent most of the long journey reading novels in the cabin, came to Huai Chaosher's side without anyone noticing. A wide-brimmed hat that was very much in the style of the northern region of the Empire covered his overly handsome face. "I know what kind of true emotions are hidden under your silence right now." Master Fan Wei smiled and said, "Perhaps my father saw the huge gap between the two sides back then, so he tried his best to stop the previous emperor from starting the West Woods expedition and tried to use the seed plan to promote peace in this universe. Unfortunately, he failed in the end, and the seed plan completely changed in the hands of your father, Huai Fuchai. It was unknown what kind of complicated emotions the Federation's war god Li Pifu, who was now sleeping behind Mount Feiqing, would have if he heard the words of Master Fan." Huai Chaosher silently looked at the blue planet in front of the warship and tightly pursed her lip. "But you don't have to worry too much. The Empire always has two advantages that the Federation can't approve. The first is population. In the end, any war is just a competition of reproduction speed. There is no difference between a war between humans and a war between monkeys." Master Fan probably had a way to ensure that his voice wouldn't be heard by the surveillance equipment on the warship. He leisurely said, "The second is the concentration of power. The Empire only has one voice, but the Federation has countless voices. The more desperate the war between the two sides is, the greater the impact of this difference will have." Of course, as a lover of literature, peace, and Schiller's novels, I am very unwilling to see this war reach this stage. Huai Chaosher finally broke the silence and said with a slightly cold gaze, "I'm not worried about these things. I'm only worried about that guy who thinks he's a messenger of justice and was turned into a stupid rock by the Federation. Will he still risk his life for these foreigners? If he were to die so pointlessly, this adventure of mine would seem rather ludicrous. Praise the Creator. Fortunately, nothing really happened between the two of you back in the manor. Otherwise, if the plot in Master Schiller's 8-parts trilogy had been fulfilled, I would have sinned greatly." The great teacher gently closed his palms and looked at the blue planet that was getting closer and closer. His eyes were intoxicated by the huge white snow cloud that spanned countless kilometers in the north of the planet. He praised, "Father, your description is right. It really is a big cotton candy." Chapter 809. Dang, 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 dang. Strong piano accents came from the television. As the piano song progressed, the sonorous melody became more and more solemn. It was as if black clouds had covered the sky of the city, and snowflakes were about to be painted the color of lead by the smoke. An extremely deep sense of crisis arose spontaneously. In this oppressive atmosphere, a low and solemn voiceover with a strong sense of compassion sounded. This is the last few years of the 36 constitutional calendar. The cruel imperial family has once again launched the extremely inhumane plan of forcibly crossing the space channel. The fierce space turbulence and the torsional data monitoring that they could not control made crossing the space channel an almost suicidal action. Usually, only 1 out of 100 spaceships could successfully cross the space channel, and the rest would all become tragic victims. However, this time, the cruelty of the imperial family was inflicted on themselves. Those spaceships that risked their lives to enter the space channel were all their own descendants. Finally, a spaceship was lucky enough to pass through the Gary corridor. Like a thief, it avoided the glory of the charter and quietly escaped into the Bermuda Triangle star region. This spaceship was mainly responsible for the mission of transporting a baby. When this baby was imported into the Federation by the Bermuda Human Trafficking Organization, his luck became the beginning of the misfortune of countless Federation families. The kind Federation man who adopted the baby was surnamed Mai. He gave the baby the name Macklin. This documentary, produced by the Federal Military's Venus Documentary Studio, was called Seed of the Empire. It was directed by the famous director Bai Ziming. Today, it officially began broadcasting on the Federation's news channel. Along with the worrisome voiceover description, the television screen showed a scene of the innocent baby playing in a private house in the Federation, including the beginning when the Imperial spaceship forcibly broke through the space channel. These scenes were all done by the director's imagination. However, this did not affect the effect of the documentary. With just the beginning, it successfully captured the attention of all the Federation citizens. After years of silence, the government of the Federation began to decrypt the Empire's seed plan and told the people of the Federation about the Macklin incident. Although there were vague rumors about it in society, most ordinary people were still shocked speechless by the story described in the documentary. The old, white-haired senator who had been almost forgotten by many people was no longer a kind-hearted pacifist who had devoted his life to the reconciliation of the Federation but an evil executor of the terrible scheme of the Imperium. According to the description of the documentary, with the joint efforts of the former president, President Pabre, the Bureau of Proclamation, and the glorious Federal Army, the Federation government wisely saw through Medellin's sinister intentions before he attempted to bring the important data of the space passage back to the Empire. They killed him in the building of the Four States Peace Foundation, which was surrounded by mountains and mountains. At the same time, because there were still many seeds of the Imperium lurking inside the Federation, in order to avoid alarming them and the evil Imperium, the government carried out a strict intelligence blockade and did not inform the people of the Federation of this information. Until recently, when the Federation confirmed that the purge was completely successful, the operation was officially decrypted. In this documentary, of course, there were no images or words mentioning the death of the seed of the Imperium, Colonel Su Lu and another man named Shi Qinghai. On the terrace of the back mountain of Macho facing the lake, one could clearly see the reflection on the surface of the lake. On the opposite hillside, layers of green and yellow trees formed a beautiful picture that did not seem to belong to the human world. Secretary Shun stood behind the high-backed chair and said softly, "Mr. Li Yuangong just called." He did not understand why the government chose this time to publicize this matter, and wanted to ask what you think. That old man who likes to wear funny round hats is not an uncultured burlesque actor. It seems that pretending to be an old fool has become a habit. Lady Tai put the delicate silver spoon into the Guna porcelain plate, looked at the lake and mountains and said calmly, "The government needs to create momentum, they need an explosive news to attract the attention of the people and make them forget about the ancient clock ship incident." As for the Parliament Hill and the continuous assassinations, they need to be completely forgotten. Of course, with Pabre's real personality hidden in his body, now that he has been re-elected, he must be very willing to tear off Macklin's last coat and kick that dead man to the ground and then step on him. No matter how you look at it, Macklin is the most troublesome opponent he has ever encountered since he started his political career. The documentary did not mention Colonel Sulu. If he is really the seed of the Imperium, Shinli asked with an extremely humble attitude, since you want to manipulate the people's psychology, why not throw Sulu out as a target? It takes a process for the ordinary people to accept things, otherwise it is easy to have doubts or even reactions. Once they completely accept the fact that Macklin is from the Imperium, it will be much easier for them to accept it when they find out that the hero of the Federation is also from the Imperium. Pabre, or other people who can influence or control the public opinion, are actually doing the same thing. Feeding the people with delicious and non-dangerous information, just like the farm owner in Bermuda, cleverly and coldly controlling the amount of food he feeds. He wants to let the chickens eat enough to avoid making a fuss, but at the same time, he can't let them die of overeating. Of course, the most important thing is that he can't let those chickens find out that their fate is to be eaten by others. Lady Tai sneered slightly, put down the coffee cup in her hand and said, "In my opinion, George Carlin has never really understood these problems. If the amount of information is too complicated, the ordinary people will not have the ability to distinguish what they need at all. They can only eat passively until they are fed, until they become idiots in the end." Shinli stood silently behind his wife, recalling the similar arguments that had appeared in books before. He just felt that it was a bit strange for these words to come out of his wife's mouth. After a moment of silence, he said, "Now it seems that all the problems are focused on one point, whether Colonel Sulu is the seed of the Imperium or not." Lady Tai did not answer this question. She silently looked at the lake under the mountain in late autumn. The autumn feeling in the yellow forest in the lake reminded her of many things from many years ago. She said lightly, "What did old Tai say?" Old Director Tai said on the phone that he enjoyed his retirement life very much. He was very happy playing golf every day. He did not give his opinion on the Sulu matter, but in the end, he said, "An era is over." Shinli paused, looked at his wife's back, and said in a low voice, "Let him be. He is the only distant relative of the Tai family. It is good for him to rest more when he is old. But back then, he was always unwilling to have more sons, and instead adopted a bunch of daughters. I really don't know what he was thinking." Lady Tai certainly knew why the former director of the Bureau of Proclamation was unwilling to adopt a son from young to old. But she, who had always been grateful, did not want to point it out. As for the end of an era that old Director Tai mentioned, of course, he was not referring to Sulu. That era referred to the past of the Federation formed by the former president who truly cherished the Federation but eventually died of illness in office, the god of war Li Pifu, Lady Tai and her husband, the former director, and perhaps the man who was wandering among the stars. Following the strong rise of Pabre's government, the death of Zhong Suahu, and the impending death of Sulu, a brand new era, one that no one could see the future clearly, and one that no one knew whether it was a good or bad era, had opened its curtains. Madame Tai stood up and left the balcony. Her back view still looked young, but it was unknown whether in this new era, she and the rulers of the big families still had the qualifications to stand behind the stage and enjoy the performances under the spotlight or just coldly watch from the sidelines. In the late autumn, a closed-door secret hearing was being held on Parliament Hill. Other than the hundreds of members of the management committee, even their closest subordinates were forced to leave. This secret hearing had nothing to do with the documentary, and had nothing to do with Macklin, who had already been thrown into the abyss. It was only related to a colonel of the Federation named Sulu. Parliament Hill had just started, but it was already in an extremely intense debate, or rather, quarrel. A few male members of the parliament directly launched vicious personal attacks on the National Security Advisor, who had just finished reading the government report on the stage. Colonel Su Lu is a hero established by the Federation government, and a trusted aide strongly protected by your president. At this time, you actually want us to believe that he is actually a citizen of the empire. Do you think that we are crazy, or are you crazy yourself? The people don't know who killed Macklin, but you don't know? Have you forgotten who killed the Butcher County King of the Empire? Mr. National Security Advisor, I really want to know if your shiny head is filled with artificial egg white. Sitting at the highest point of the stage, Mr. Zion, the vice chairman, was clearly unable to control the situation that was currently out of control, and it seemed that he had no intention of controlling the situation. The old chairman stroked the white hair on his forehead, thinking about the situation that had taken a turn for the worse in recent days. He knew that his hopes of Su Lu blowing up the storm and becoming the vice president, or even the president of the Federation, had been completely shattered. Thinking that his days were numbered, it was already difficult for him not to show disappointment on his face. How could he have the mood to care about anything else? The members who were angrily criticizing the government, the president, and mocking the National Security Advisor did not admire Colonel Su Lu, and were even incomparably disgusted or fearful. Today there were several empty seats on Parliament Hill, reminding the people from time to time that the owners of these seats had died under the guns of Su Lu and his companions. However, as Li Feng said to Du Shaoqing, no one in the Federation believed that Su Lu was a citizen of the Empire, and neither did the members of the Parliament. The shocking demonstration not long ago had directly caused Pabre's government to become more powerful. Parliament Hill, which had been forced to remain silent for too long, did not hesitate to seize the government's extremely stupid mistake and launch a counterattack. Pay attention to your demeanor. At the same time, improve your logical judgment. At this moment, the situation represented that the government and a considerable number of members of the parliament were about to shed all pretense of cordiality. The National Security Advisor no longer cared about anything and slammed the seat in front of him with a livid face, reprimanding loudly, "Why can't a hero of the Federation be a spy of the Empire? Macklin was a member of the Federation elected by the people, so he is a citizen of the Empire." The noise on Parliament Hill gradually weakened. Some of the members began to seriously consider a certain possibility, regretting that they had reacted too quickly and acted too exaggeratedly. Chapter 8:10. Councillor Evo was the daughter of a miner from the Eastwood district. She had no background and was known for her isolation in Parliament Hill. Last year, during the hearing on the Federation's arrest of Su Lu, it was she who first questioned Councillor Paulson, who had died in the hospital building. Colonel Su Lu is the same as President Pabre. He is the pride of the Eastwood district. Now you are saying that the boy from Eastwood is from the Empire. I cannot accept it emotionally. Councillor Evo looked at the National Security Advisor in front of her and said, "I want evidence. I want impeccable evidence. Otherwise, I will fight you to the end." The National Security Advisor looked at her and answered after a moment of silence. He knew that this female councillor was a staunch supporter of the President in Parliament, so he answered with a very polite tone. "The Bureau of Proclamation is arranging for the second confirmation of the evidence. If the councillors are willing, the government welcomes you to supervise the whole process. What the President means is that since we want to accuse a hero of the Federation, the relevant evidence must be believed by everyone, including Su Lu himself." One day in late autumn, countless dark-colored cars drove slowly into the Bureau of Proclamation along the straight dead-end road in the suburbs. These cars included councillors from Parliament Hill, civilian representatives who had signed temporary confidentiality agreements, senior reporters from various authoritative and serious media outlets, as well as senior officials from the government and many important generals from the military. President Pabre was there in person, and the 7 families had sent their most trustworthy representatives. The Bureau of Proclamation had the highest level of security among all the organizations in the Federation. It was even higher than the President's official residence. It was usually heavily guarded, and today the atmosphere was even more oppressive and tense. Most of the leading figures of the Federation were gathered here. If the Empire had the ability to cause a big explosion at this time, it was not an exaggeration to say that the Federation would definitely be in chaos. This was a very old-fashioned way of describing it, but it was very suitable for today's situation. Chief Editor Bob and reporter Wood stood below the Bureau of Proclamation building, looking at the box-like building that was too regular in shape. As members of the news industry, this was the first time they had the opportunity to enter the mysterious Bureau of Proclamation. They should have been excited to record everything they saw, but at this moment their emotions were extremely complicated and heavy. After most of the people were invited into the building of the Constitutional Bureau, several bulletproof military vehicles drove over at high speed. Under the protection of several armed military police officers, Zhou Yu and Shang Qiu jumped out of the military vehicles with handcuffs on. From the outside, the 2 women didn't suffer much from the government's secret investigation. After all, one of them was the daughter of the former Minister of Defense, and she had been invited by that lady again in recent months to have tea together. The other was one of the best genius engineers in the Federation, the chief technical director of the giant corporation Nutshell Mobility. No matter which investigation department it was, they had to be polite to them. The government specifically asked them to come and watch the comparison of biological markers, which vaguely revealed some kind of message. It seemed that the President or General Li Jiedu hoped that they would wake up after seeing the real face of Su Lu and not fall deeper and deeper into the wrong path. This was a very old-fashioned way of saying, but it was very appropriate to describe the government's attitude toward the 2 women who were still very valuable. Su Lu was a war hero of the Federation and an idol in the hearts of the people. Suddenly, he was accused of being a spy of the Empire. For such a major incident, there must be enough strong evidence. Therefore, President Pabre did not hesitate to agree to the second comparison of biological markers. He intended to use this incident as an opportunity to quickly stabilize the unstable political situation due to the recent series of incidents. He intended to integrate the power of the Federation and let the word unity enter the hearts of the people again. The last vehicles to arrive at the Bureau of Proclamation were a dark green military vehicle and a black vehicle without any markings. The vehicles stopped under the stone step. General Li Jiedu walked out of the military vehicle and looked at the black vehicle in front of him calmly and gently. The door of the black vehicle slowly opened. A pale and thin young man walked out, holding a small metal box tightly in his hands. The white-haired butler Jean looked at him worriedly and said, "Young master, why don't I take it?" Tai Ziyuan shook his head and carried the small metal box to the Bureau of Proclamation. The box was not heavy, but he held it very tightly with his hands wearing anti-slip white glove. This was because there was a bottle of blood in the box that he had personally gone to the military prison of Qingqing and drawn from that guy. This bottle of blood could not determine whether Su Lu lived or died, but it could affect the political situation of the entire Federation. However, for Tai Ziyuan, the importance of this bottle of blood was that it could prove something that was more important than life and death in the eyes of some people. The internal protection of the metal box was extremely sophisticated and advanced. Even if it fell from dozens of meters to the ground, the things inside would not be damaged. However, this box was too important to Su Lu. It involved too many things. He only trusted Tai Ziyuan, and Tai Zhuan only trusted that it would not be replaced by someone else. Until now, although no one believed that the Federal Central Computer could be wrong, people like Macho and the Back Mountain, who had used the internal staff of the Bureau of Proclamation more than once, still believed that the last biological marker comparison was most likely done by the Bureau of Proclamation under the orders of the government. For the opposite reason, Li Jiedu personally went to the military prison of Qinqing and supervised the entire process of Tai Zhuan drawing Su Li's blood. As for Macklin's biological marker, it had always been stored in the core backup of the Federal Central Computer. Macho and the Iron Mathematician had also secretly stored a copy after the Macklin case broke out. No one could fake it. The people walked into the Bureau of Proclamation building. After a long time, the people walked out of the Bureau of Proclamation building. At this moment, a cold autumn rain fell without warning. The people of high status had their own escorts holding up umbrellas. In an instant, black flowers bloomed in the square in front of the building, covering the people's faces. The true emotions on their faces could not be seen clearly. The wide and straight road leading from the Bureau of Proclamation to the outside world was once again occupied by all kinds of dark-colored vehicles. Most of the vehicles were black. The cold autumn rain pitter-pattered on the vehicles, and the tires rolled up a thick layer of mist as they whizzed away. It was as if they had just attended a sad funeral. When the funeral was over, the people left in a hurry, not wanting to be tainted with any bad luck. Tai Zhuan, who was the last to arrive, was still the last to walk out of the Bureau of Proclamation building. His thin and pale cheeks were stained with an unhealthy red. The two hands that were not carrying the small metal box waved irritably. He refused the umbrella that Butler Jean extended over his head and walked down the stone step. He walked into the rain, letting the cold autumn rain soak his body from top to bottom. In addition to the important people in the Bureau of Proclamation building, in the distant end of the vast universe, on the Mo Hua planet at the center of the battlefield, some people almost simultaneously knew the result. According to President Pabre's personal order, the Bureau of Proclamation specially set up a multi-encrypted information channel to synchronize the image of the biological marker comparison to the Mo Hua planet. In a certain office in the Federation base, all the high-ranking officers of the new 17th Division, including Commander Chenghai and all the members of the first 7 teams, collectively watched this scene. The Federation government had no choice but to do this. After the battle between the Iron 7th Division and the Little White Flower MXD in the wilderness, their accusation that Su Lu was a spy for the Empire spread uncontrollably within the army, even to the front lines of the Empire. The soldiers respected heroes like Su Lu who did not fear death the most. Even the Iron 7th Division could not bear to do it in the end, let alone the other soldiers. Of course, under the strict discipline of the Federation Army, the morale of the various troops was shaken, but it was not too big of a problem. Only the reaction of the new 17th Division was particularly strong. From Commander He to Hua Xiaoxi, from Lin Ai to the ordinary soldiers, not to mention people like Xiong Linquan and Gu Shifeng, they firmly believed that this was the most shameless and dark persecution of the Federation government. They even began to pick up their guns, preparing to forcibly board the warship and kill their way back to the capital ring to save people. In such a terrifying situation, the Federation government had to use ironclad evidence to intimidate these fearless soldiers at the first possible moment. The room full of people was deathly silent. Only the sound of countless rapid breathing could be heard. In order to see the snowflakes caused by the long-distance signal transmission, Commander Helay's eyes were already a little bloodshot. However, in the end, they only turned into despair. He breathed heavily, tore open the collar of his military uniform, and wanted to pick up the cup to drink water, only to find that the water in the cup had long been emptied. Commander Yu Chenghai had always maintained his silence regarding the incomparably intense reaction of the soldiers in the past few days, to the point of preparing to kill their way back to the capital ring. As a veteran of the generation of military godly Pifu, he always insisted that what the army needed were not ice-cold killing machines, but great men full of hot-blooded vitality and injustice. Moreover, he was the same as his subordinate. He believed that the accusation of spying for the Empire was definitely another disgusting plot by the Federation politicians, but the truth was not so. All right, everything is over. Return to your respective combat positions and prepare to fight against the Empire's people. Of course, you have to mentally prepare yourself for the military trial, Commander Yu said in a low voice. The wrinkles on his face seemed to have deepened a bit. Don't be a sissy. Xiong Linquan stood up with a gloomy expression. He stared at Gu Shifeng, who was tugging at her hair in frustration, and roared, "In any case, I don't believe it." He looked at his comrades in the room and waved his arms angrily. Boss has led us to fight so many battles. When has he not charged at the very front? Who has he killed less Empire people than? He is our boss. Your instructor. How can someone like him be from the King Empire? Xiong Linquan angrily slammed the door and walked out. A moment later, a howl of venting came from outside the door, followed by the sound of countless bullets tearing through the sky. This is the 6th chapter. The monthly votes are now at 8807, not 8897. I wrote it first. I'm more handsome than you guys. 72 has exploded. The situation is critical. I won't write a single chapter now. Yes, I'm still writing the 7th chapter. Who cares? Since it's already like this, I'll just eat a meal and wait for the 9,379 last day. Monthly votes. Monthly votes. Monthly votes. Chapter 811. This incident that was destined to shake the entire Federation was forcefully determined in the direction of development in the Bureau of Proclamation. The pale and skinny prince walked in the cold rain with an indifferent expression. No one knew that an equally pale and skinny guy was sent to a military psychiatric hospital in the Southern Hemisphere because of another incident that was destined to shake the entire universe but was forcibly buried in data fragments. His pale eyes were bloodshot, and his eye sockets were deeply sunken. At this moment, Biderman looked like a street trash who had overdosed on drugs. Because of the hysterical experience in the Bureau of Proclamation, he had a lot of suspicious little actions. For example, his lips would tremble at a high speed from time to time, and he would often open his 10 skinny fingers and move them from top to bottom in front of him, mimicking a waterfall falling down. I'm not crazy. Biderman curled up in the chair weakly. Looking at the doctor in front of him, his eyes were full of pride and sadness. The charter computer came back to life. I saw it with my own eyes, but then I saw with my own eyes she was killed. From the beginning to the end, this genius with a terrifying sense of the mechanical language insisted on calling the intelligent old thing her. Now, when he talked about the death of the great mechanical wisdom, he couldn't help but show a sorrowful expression on his face. The doctor listened calmly with a smile, and simply took down the medical record. After walking out of the ward, the doctor whispered a few words to the strong male nurse. Then, he smiled at the young lieutenant colonel in front of him and said, "This is a military hospital. Since you've handed him over to me, you can rest assured." The officer said seriously, "The person inside has made a great contribution to the Federation, but he knows too many things. You must take good care of him." "Understood. I'll let him enjoy his old age here." The doctor smiled and replied, "I'll inform you immediately if there are any problems." The officer raised his right hand and saluted. He thanked the doctor for his hard work and left the psychiatric hospital that was far away from the bustling world and filled with the smell of drugs that even he wanted to escape. The doctor looked at the back of the officer and smiled gently. Then, he looked into the ward through the observation window on the door. On the other side of the thin glass, Biderman, who was put on a restraining gown by the strong male nurse, was screaming in horror, "I know! There's chlorpromazine in the syringe. Don't give me that, I don't want it. I beg you, don't give me this, I don't want to become an idiot." Because of fear, Biedermann's weak body struggled on the bed. He looked like a pitiful fish that had been thrown into the desert. He begged, "I know I was wrong. I'm not mentally ill. I don't know anything. That guy has never been alive. Please let me go." The doctor looked at this scene through the glass. He watched as the sharp needle slowly pierced into the man's pale skin. Hearing the shrill screams coming from behind the door, the smile on his face became even gentler. In the deepest part of Chinching military prison, the special forces directly under Small Eyes unit surrounded and monitored the cell with the strictest security measures. They were always on guard against the two people inside breaking out of the prison. Although the Chinching military prison was filled with the most heinous and bloody criminals of the Federation, and the security measures should be flawless, every time they thought of the rumors about the two people in the prison cell, everyone, from the warden to the elites of the Federation who had been trained in the Philadelphia Training Center, could hardly control the nervousness in their hearts. Yes, there were two terrifying people in the same cell. After Su Lu was seriously injured and arrested by the Iron 7th Division, Madman Li directly crushed the precision lock of the special alloy handcuffs with his strong finger strength. The two people's bodies were always connected by the handcuff. Without the key, it was naturally impossible to open them, and he would not allow anyone to try to open them. They ate, received treatment, bathed, went to the toilet, and slept. They were together all the time. Madman Li stayed by Su Li's side every second. His vigilant and ruthless eyes scanned the surroundings because he believed that the Federation government, who dared to design such a shameless plot, would definitely do everything possible to secretly kill Su Lu. Madman Li had the bad temper of a standard soldier. He absolutely could not tolerate such a thing happening, and he could not let the only sister-in-law in the world who truly loved him become a widow before she was married. During these days in Chinching prison, Madman Li stayed by Su Li's side. He stayed in this dark cell like he was guarding the position of the army, not giving an inch of ground. Even a vicious tiger would not eat its own cubs, but in the end it was eaten. Uncle Zhong was killed by them just like that. I want to see if that old bastard will kill his only son. Li Feng sat on the bed with a cigarette in his mouth. He stared coldly at the Special Forces soldiers with serious expressions outside the cell. He thought of his father who had just left the prison, and his voice was extremely cold. The anger and frustration hidden in the young colonel's terrifyingly burly body was clearly captured by Su Lu. He knew very well why. Madman Li, who had left home at a young age and spent his entire adolescence in the front line of the West Woods, had always regarded the tiger as his closest elder and even a father figure. However, the mastermind behind the explosion of the ancient bell, the real murderer who killed Commander Zhong, was his biological father. What could he do? Ah Yuan, that bastard, he actually took so much of my blood just now. He didn't even think about the fact that I haven't recovered from my injuries yet. I could have been killed by him directly. Su Lu, who was holding a cigarette, smiled and changed the topic. However, when he thought of Tai Yuan's dignified expression, his fingers trembled slightly, and the ashes of the cigarette fell on the bedsheet. At this moment, in the Bureau of Proclamation building of the capital's Special Administrative Region, the second biological marker comparison was being carried out. Su Lu never thought that he was a citizen of the Empire, but he couldn't help but feel nervous. As Madman Li once said, death was not terrible, but being wrongly accused of being a citizen of the Empire was unacceptable. Once accepted, it was equivalent to surrendering to the conspiracy of the government. Because of Li Feng, his second stay in the Chinching military prison was not too difficult. Although the crime this time was more horrible than assassinating a member of the parliament, He was satisfied with all kinds of living conditions, whether it was a hot bath or a cigarette. After all, since the prison couldn't get rid of Li Feng, of course, they wouldn't dare to treat the only son of Chairman Li unfairly. After taking a deep puff of the cigarette, Su Lu narrowed his eyes and looked at the late autumn sky outside the window. He was wearing a warm cotton thermal jacket. Because of the handcuffs, he couldn't put his left hand into the sleeve and could only drape it. Perhaps it was because of this reason that he felt a little cold. Noticing Su Li's strangeness, Li Feng's delicate eyebrows slightly raised. There was a trace of mockery on his face as he said, "Are you afraid of death? You should know that during the war period, those who assassinate the president are traitors. You deserve to die. The president and your father killed Commander Zhong, but it could arouse the anger of the people of the Federation. They could use this opportunity to start an all-out war against the Empire. So they are not traitors? If I could really kill the president last time, I could actually push the blame to the people of the Empire." With the cigarette in his mouth, Su Lu said vaguely, "Didn't they say that I'm from the Empire? According to their logic, President Pabre should have sacrificed himself. The assassination of the President of the Federation by the people of the Empire is much more fierce than the ancient Bell incident. The people and the troops will be aroused, and the Federation will definitely win the biggest victory on the battlefield." Just when Li Feng was about to praise Su Lu for slapping the face of the Federation government, the phone in his pocket rang. He picked it up immediately and didn't avoid Su Lu. After hanging up the phone, Li Feng turned his head and looked at Su Lu with a very complicated expression. After a very long silence, he said with a slightly hoarse voice, "The result is out." Su Lu narrowed his eyes. "You really don't know that you are from the Empire?" Li Feng withdrew his gaze and looked at the cigarette between his lips with white smoke in silence. He was very focused. Su Lu suddenly opened his eyes. On his seemingly calm face, the pair of thick black eyebrows that were as straight as knives dangerously raised. His pupils that were usually full of sincerity and trustworthiness constricted in a very short time and then slowly relaxed. He didn't answer because he couldn't. The dark cell fell into a deathly silence. The long and boring time that seemed to be about to freeze moved slowly in the silence until Li Feng's slightly cold voice sounded again. "It was in this prison that Grandpa met you for the first time. You should remember that I promised him in front of you that if one day you dare to betray the Federation, I will definitely kill you with my own hands." Su Lu still didn't answer. His feet retracted back onto the bed and his back leaned against the wall. He looked indifferently at the black bloodstains left behind by a dead fly in the summer on the snow-white wall. It was unknown what he was thinking about. "Su Lu, I've never liked you. You might be a good person, but you are definitely not a good soldier. You often mess around, but I have to admit that I never thought that you would betray the Federation. So I never understood why Grandpa would say those words so seriously back then." Madman Li took a deep drag of the cigarette and licked his lips with the tip of his tongue. After a short pause, he continued, "Now I have a general understanding. Perhaps Grandpa knew about this before anyone else." Su Lu still leaned against the wall. His eyes didn't close, and his thick eyebrows that were like knives gradually relaxed. He just looked across in silence and didn't say anything. "I believe that you don't know that you are a citizen of the Empire. Of course, you have never betrayed the Federation. But since the blood of the Empire's royal family flows in your body, this in itself is a type of betrayal." Madman Li threw the cigarette, but that had already lost its flavor to the ground. He turned his head to look at the indifferent face that was extremely close to him and said, "I won't kill you with my own hands because you are a good person. No, there are no good people in the Empire. Fine, even if you are a citizen of the Empire, you are definitely not a spy for the Empire. This reason should be enough." Hearing these words that were clearly somewhat illogical and ridiculous, Su Lu turned his head to look at him. The corners of his lips moved, and he laughed in an extremely ugly manner. Let's go." He laughed as if he was crying. Chapter 8:12. Hearing the words, "Let's go," Mad Manly was silent for a long time before he nodded. The two of them sat side by side on the bed with their backs against the wall of the cell. They casually raised their handcuffed hands, Su Li's left hand and Li Feng's right hand, and exerted force in opposite directions at the same time. The special alloy handcuffs that had handcuffed the two of them for many days had long been broken. Even if there was a key, it couldn't be opened. However, under the seemingly casual tugging of the two young men on the bed, the handcuffs began to creak and gradually deform. A crisp sound of metal breaking echoed in the quiet cell. The thick alloy handcuffs, specially made for Su Lu, were torn apart by the two men just like that. Only a round handcuff was left. It kept rotating on the two men's wrists, gradually digesting the terrifying force they had just endured. The cold light of the broken handcuffs flashed from time to time. Several elite Special Forces soldiers of the Federation who had been guarding outside the cell saw this scene, and were so shocked that their bodies stiffened. Their pupils constricted, and they fell into a state of confusion for a long time. It wasn't until Li Feng walked to the door with a livid face that they reacted and opened the door more cautiously than before. Looking at Li Feng's burly and strong back that gradually disappeared into the depths of the corridor, and looking at Su Lu, who was in a daze as he looked at the fly's corpse and black blood on the wall again, these elite Special Forces soldiers who had received close combat training in Philadelphia's Body Training Hall still found it hard to believe that there was actually someone in this world who could break apart such hard alloy handcuff. And they only used the strength of one hand. Was this a human or a machine? Until now, the elite Special Forces soldiers completely agreed with the rumors in the army. Su Lu and Mad Manly were, without a doubt, the two most powerful men in the Federation. However, their situation now was completely different. Li Feng could leave this prison at any time, but Su Lu could only sit silently in the cell and wait for the arrival of death. Su Lu leaned against the wall and sat on the bed. He slightly tilted his head and stared at the white wall in a daze. With his eyesight, he could even clearly see the tiny wings on the dried corpse of the fly between the black congealed blood stains. It seemed that this disgusting and pitiful fellow was still futilely trying to escape when he was beaten to death by the previous owner of this cell in the summer. Why flee? As a fly, your fate is either to die in a cesspool or to die on the way to find a cesspool. What's the point of escaping from one cesspool to another? Su Lu closed his eyes tiredly. Hearing the hurried footsteps outside the door, he guessed that it must be the Qingqing military prison who came to give him some measures. He understood that Mad Manly had chosen to directly break the alloy handcuffs because he wanted to silently tell the prison that such a method would not be able to restrain his strong and powerful hands. Regarding this, Su Lu did not have any resentment or disappointment in his heart. On the contrary, he felt that it was natural. Since he had confirmed that he was a citizen of the Empire, Mad Manly would certainly not give him the chance to escape. If it were him in the past, he would certainly have made the same decision. The heavy and hard alloy door of the cell silently slid open. Several prison staff members walked in with nervous expressions. First, they crouched down and increased the suction force of the heavy magnetic shackles on Su Li's feet to the maximum. Then, they fastened 3 sets of reinforced handcuffs on his wrist. There was a metal bracelet on his left wrist and a broken handcuff. Now there were 3 more sets of handcuffs. They were densely stacked together. Occasionally, there would be a crisp sound of metal clashing. It looked as beautiful as those thin bracelets on the wheat-colored delicate forearms of the S3 Flowing Fire Festival. If it was last time in the Qingqing military prison, Su Lu would definitely laugh. But now, he did not want to laugh. Even his posture did not change. He completely ignored these people. Only when the prison doctor tried to inject him with some kind of drug did he turn his head to look at the other party. He did not stop the doctor from injecting. He just looked. After an unknown amount of time, Su Lu, who was like a stone sculpture, finally woke up from the inexplicable state caused by the violent psychological impact. His gaze was still indifferent and emotionless. His thick eyebrows, which were sometimes like unsheathed straight knives and sometimes like laughing willow branches, were still indifferent and lazy. His posture was still the same, but his brain had finally recovered some ability to think. People of the Empire. He was a person of the Empire. When did he know that there were not only people from the East Woods, West Woods, Upper Woods? There were also people of the Empire. Like wringing a wet towel, Su Lu racked his brain, trying hard to recall many memories of his childhood. He even frowned, but still could not remember anything more. He only vaguely remembered that when he was young, his father used to read the newspaper at the dining table, lamenting about the cruelty of the people of the Empire. And when his father used the people of the Empire to scare little Xian-Yi, his mother would fly into a rage, and his father would immediately apologize with a smile. Now, he actually rarely recalled his childhood life because it was too long ago. When the terrible shallow mine disaster that caused half of the mining area to collapse happened, he was still very young, so he did not have many clear memories. Because he went to the slag heap with Victor and the others to play mecha battle games, he was extremely lucky to survive. However, his father, who worked in the underground mine, died. His mother and little Xian-Yi, who were at home on the surface, also died. Victor's family was also dead. Xiao Chang's father was also dead. Donglin had a bunch of orphans. Other than that, nothing had changed. The children, who cried until their throats were hoarse, could only watch helplessly as the engineering mecha lifted the heavy quick-setting cement blocks in vain. The scene was extremely sad and chaotic. Su Lu could not even find the bodies of his parents. He only held the body of his sister, Xian-Yi. He still remembered how cold that small and cute body was. Yes, little Xian-Yi's small grave was still on the hillside outside of the East Woods. He felt very ashamed that he had not gone back to see it for so long. This was also the reason why he did not want to recall his childhood. What about the people of the Empire? Su Li's thick eyebrows were more and more furrowed. He stared at the wall but did not know where to look. He remembered that the first time he saw what the people of the Empire looked like was on the TV news. It seemed to be a documentary, talking about the only official visit of the Empire in history. The voiceover of the male commentator of the Federation was full of a sense of superiority that looked down on the inferior races. Every 3 minutes, he would mock the Empire people in the diplomatic mission, as if they would never smile. As for Su Lu, he only remembered that the people of the Empire on the TV were not like what his father said. They were not covered with scary long hair from head to toe, including their faces. So he thought of his dead family and secretly ran to the abandoned mine to cry. Where was the first time he saw a living person of the Empire? It should be on the West Woods border planet called 5460. At that time, he took Jian Shuer and fled under the pursuit of the Empire's Wolf Fang Mecha Brigade. The first time he met the people of the Empire was a life-and-death battle. As for the dead people of the Empire, he had seen too many of them. The sun outside the window slowly sank into the distant horizon, and the light became much dimmer. Qingqing military prison was not as cold as the capital at this time, but Su Lu, who was sitting on the bed leaning against the wall, seemed to be frozen, allowing the twilight to appear and disappear on his face. The darkness of night covered the earth, but he did not move at all, only remaining silent. Silence, silence. He did not become perverted in silence. He was only indifferently recalling and thinking about many things. Many things that he could not understand in the past gradually became a clear function curve in his mind. Although he did not know what the variables at the beginning of this function curve were, some segments of the curve were gradually beginning to reveal the answer. For example, why in the entire Federation, other than the people of Old Li's family, He was the only one who could learn the special abilities of the Empire's royal family. For example, why that man who wandered among the stars actually stayed in Donglin for so many years and appeared so coincidentally by his side. It should be known that in the real world, there was never a fortuitous encounter like in novels. There must be an internal reason for small probability events. The descendants of the rich were rich, and the legendary were legendary. The story of starting from scratch, the story of a foolish boy meeting a wise master, could only be a story in the end. Then, was it also a conspiracy that he entered the uncle's repair shop? No, he did not want to connect the coincidental encounter between the young man and the escaped criminal with these words. Don't think about it anymore. Sulu felt very tired. He just wanted to fall asleep, but he could not because this unbearable change was like countless ants crawling in his body. They silently and contemptuously bit and tore at his fresh flesh, spitting extremely corrosive acid. Once the acid splashed, it sizzled. The painful, sore, itchy, and burning sensation converged into a straight line. The line of fire gathered into a ball in his chest and began to burn fiercely. This ball of fire was really unbearable, and he was extremely angry for no reason. Sulu finally moved. He stood up from the bed and tightly pursed his thin lip. He lifted the heavy prison bed with one hand and slammed it against the snow-white wall in front of him. It was as if he wanted to smash the extremely small ball of black blood and the already withered corpse of the fly into pieces again. With a loud bang, the bed frame broke into pieces and dust flew everywhere. The stern reprimand of the Special Forces soldier came from outside the door, but he acted as if he didn't hear or feel anything. With a heavy punch, he directly smashed the only small square table in the cell into pieces. Boom, 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 boom. Countless violent sounds rang out in the cell, and debris flew everywhere. For the first time in his life, Sulu vented his emotions so wantonly. He almost crazily smashed everything in front of him that he could see. In the end, even a terrifying hole appeared in the hard alloy door. At this moment, his peripheral vision fell on the window. Through the tempered glass that was so thick that it distorted his vision, he saw the twinkling stars in the late autumn night sky. He did not know why it touched the eternally strong but fragile nerves in his heart for the first time today. Looking at the bright starry sky above his head, he calmed down and slowly walked to the window. There was a crushed pack of cigarettes and a lighter on the ground. They were probably left behind by Madmanly before she left. Sulu picked one up, lit it, and stuffed it into his mouth. He narrowed his eyes and looked at the night sky outside the window. He said softly, "F***ck your mother." Chapter 8:13. Ever since the 37 constitutions, there had always been an ugly person from the Imperium in the hearts of every citizen of the Federation. In their eyes, the cruel enemies of Zhuotianxing were uncivilized, bloodthirsty barbarians, inferior races struggling in the closed and outdated social system. Just like Xiong Linquan's true emotions when he roared furiously on Mo Hua planet, in his eyes, it was impossible for the Motherf King Empire citizens to have a character worthy of praise. Li Feng, who had been fighting the Empire soldiers in the West Woods since he was 12 years old, instinctively believed that there were no good people in the Empire. Sulu narrowed his eyes and looked at the starry sky outside the window. Thinking of his bizarre background, he couldn't help but laugh self-deprecatingly. In the past few years, he had fought for the Federation and the Empire, but it turned out that the people he had killed were all his own people. It turned out that he was actually an inferior race in the eyes of the Federation citizens. Cloaked in glory and guarded his own rights, he had been silently and stubbornly walking the path he thought was right. However, before the white clouds in the sky could turn into dogs and the mulberry fields on the ground could be swallowed by the ocean, the hero of the Federation suddenly became a prisoner, a poisonous seed buried deep in the Federation by the Empire. This kind of strong contrast was not easily accepted by anyone. Su Lu, who had the thickest nerves in the universe, could only stop himself from going crazy and force himself to calm down with the help of the night sky outside the window. That day on the phone, President Pabre had asked him if he felt that the whole world had let him down. At this moment, he really did feel that way. An abandoned child of the Empire stood alone in the prison cell of the Federation, as if the entire universe was slowly leaving him. A thick and deep feeling of loneliness enveloped his entire body. He stood quietly by the window like this for an entire night until the 2 moons dispersed, the stars fell, and the white willow trees appeared on the horizon. Schiller once famously said, "The coming day will be longer than the last year." The original meaning of this sentence was that the unexperienced future was more beautiful and valuable than everything in the past added together. But to Su Lu at this moment, these words meant that even if he only had 1 day left to live, he could only spend it in anger, pain, struggle, and frustration, and it would definitely be extremely long. The newborn red sun struggled to jump out of the horizon and shone on the window of the prison from the side. Su Lu was awakened by the sudden strong light and subconsciously narrowed his eyes. For some reason, he suddenly remembered that in the few years after he escaped from the East Forest sector, his truly happy and peaceful days were actually in the shabby courtyard in the slums of the Left Heaven space zone. Were the people of the Empire really born bad people? In fact, he had never thought about it this way. Aunt Susan and Paul were good people, and the Imperial officer under Glacier 5460 was also a good person. So what if he was from the Empire? The key is what kind of person you are. The fleeting thought was like a ray of light, instantly flashing in his mind and then disappearing, making Su Lu's somewhat muddle-headed mind calm down a lot. After a long period of silence, he picked up a piece of sharp metal shard from the ground. Facing the glass, he grabbed a strand of long hair and slowly and seriously cut it off. Following the cutting of the shard, his black hair slowly fell to the ground beside his feet. The somewhat deformed face on the glass window was still so familiar, but the cut short hairstyle that was almost flat cut was particularly messy, like burning weeds. The prison door slid open silently, and the pale and thin Tai Zuan walked in. He kicked the bed leg that was smashed by Su Lu. He moved his feet with some difficulty and walked behind Su Lu. Looking at the messy scene around him, after a moment of silence, he sat directly on the ground and carefully put down the metal box in his hand. Su Lu turned his head to look at Tai Zuan and calmly greeted him. "You're here." "Yes, I'm here." Tai Zuan raised his head to look at his messy short hair, frowned, and gave a simple reply. In reality, both of them knew that Tai Zuan still came to visit Su Lu in prison after confirming that he was a seed of the Empire. They didn't know what kind of psychological struggle he had experienced last night. Sit. Tai Zuan sat on the ground and greeted him. Then he laughed self-deprecatingly and said, "Since His Highness Prince Delin of the Empire is your uncle, then you are very likely to be the real crown prince of the Empire. Maybe it really is the bloodline at work. No wonder you never respected me, the fake crown prince, since you met me." "Don't talk nonsense." Su Lu kicked away the trash on the ground and sat down directly. He said, "I've never believed in these disgusting bloodline theories. Even if I'm just a dung picker, there's no reason for me to respect you in the way you want me to respect you." He followed up with another sentence, "Other than being better than me in bed, how can you compare to me?" Today, Tai Zuan didn't argue with him. He looked at him with a complicated expression and said, "You are really surprising. I thought I would see a martial arts maniac with bloodshot eyes today, but in the end, the one who appeared in front of me is actually the original you. I don't know whether I should praise your pure nature and thick nerves, or laugh at you for being an ignorant and fearless stinky rock. After only one night, you've accepted the fact that you're a citizen of the Imperium. Tai Xuan laughed self-deprecatingly and said, I spent an entire night and still couldn't understand this matter. You watched the biological comparison, so I trust you. Although the charter computer is just a cold machine, I don't think it will make a mistake. So no matter how you think about it, you can't get rid of your identity as a citizen of the Empire. So other than accepting it, what else can you do? That makes sense. Tai Xuan was silent for a moment. He took the metal box and opened it. He lowered his head and said seriously, I will remember the friendship between you and me. In the future, I will tell my descendants that my best friend is a citizen of the Empire. I remember that you were supposed to get married this autumn, Su Lu asked. Tai Xuan smiled and replied, it was postponed. Su Lu was silent. Tai Xuan pushed the metal box in front of Su Lu and said, plain porridge with scallion pancakes. After eating, you can go on your way in peace and die in peace. Su Lu was very clear-headed and calm. No one in the entire Federation would help him, not even his best friend. This had nothing to do with betrayal, and even less with cowardice. It was only related to the endless racial hatred between the Federation and the Empire that had lasted for hundreds of years. His last friend was sending him on his last journey to meet up with his best friend underground. This wasn't too painful of a matter, so after Su Lu took the plain porridge and scallion pancakes, he simply said, okay. Like a whale sucking in water, he finished the plain porridge in the box. After eating 3 scallion pancakes, the slightly full Su Lu suddenly looked at Tai Xuan and said, these last few days, I don't want to eat in the prison cell. Can you help arrange for them to let me eat in the cafeteria? Tai Xuan vaguely caught some information from his words. He suddenly raised his head and stared into his eyes. Su Lu didn't evade. He calmly and stubbornly looked back at him. There was only a strong desire to live and the most complete sincerity toward his friend. Chapter 8:14. 24 hours, 9 chapters, 27,000 words. It had never happened before, and it would probably be very difficult in the future. Behind the madness was a pack of Hongtashan, 6 cans of Red Bull, 4 bottles of mineral water, a bowl of zhajiang noodles, and a boxed lunch. Old Chow said that every word was laborious. Oh, he meant that every word was filled with blood. I was not so miserable. He was the ocean, and I was a drop of water. I just wanted to say that these 27,000 words were written seriously, and my attitude was guaranteed. In the end, I did not feel tired or bitter. Because of my narcissism, I was abnormally excited and broke my own limits until my eyelids were as heavy as my weight. Although I wrote a lot, I encountered the most tragic plot of the spy. It was not a climax that could pull vote. Even I was depressed, sad, and depressed when I wrote, let alone you who were reading the story. It's the time to welcome the new year. Many people are playing and drinking. I'm chatting with you on the keyboard. I'm not complaining, because it's not bitter at all. After getting high, writing really becomes the best entertainment. It's still that mushy but sincere sentence. Who asked it to be my hobby to serve you? In 2010, I bought a house, learned to drive, bought a car, practiced driving, got a marriage certificate, held a wedding ceremony, went on a honeymoon, and even went to Inner Mongolia to attend Zhang Xiaohua's wedding ceremony. I always hoped that the vast number of wise readers would pity and understand cats. When I had the time and energy to write, I would never not write. When I could not write, then I really could not write. Those who could understand, long live. Those who could not understand, long live 9,000 years, cough cough. To be honest, I came to an unfamiliar place alone, without any connections or experience. To complete the series of things that shrunk the essence and pain of life really consumed too much of my energy. At the end of the year, I finally finished everything and began to find the world and feeling back. In December, I encountered another week of illness and decadence. But my heart was here, and I did not care. I only needed to work hard and write seriously. In the end, 8 consecutive days of 3 chapters, and 1 day of 4 chapters, was the most enjoyable and longest process I had ever done since I started writing in 2003. As for today's 9 chapters, it was something that I had never even thought about. It was very refreshing to wash away the busy and gloomy air of this year. It was very refreshing to really challenge my own limit. It was very refreshing to use this method to welcome the new year with you. We were halfway through our journey, and we fought our way from 8th place to 2nd place. Although we were currently in 3rd place, the scene of our chrysanthemum being destroyed was a rare sight for me. Today, other than being crazy, what I was most proud of was that I suddenly realized that I had learned how to use hooks instinctively when writing books. There will always be a place where I can use the pen for clarity in the future. I am very happy about this. When I write slowly, the quality is not necessarily good. When I edit 3 chapters a day, the quality is the best. Today, I wrote so much and my head is so muddled, so the quality is naturally not as stable as when I was writing 3 chapters. Please bear with me. I'm going to sleep now. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to welcome the new year in my dreams. As for the final ranking of the monthly votes, it's all up to you. I've already done my best. As for what would happen next year, he would explain in detail tomorrow. The line was still 180,000. I'm really starting to feel sorry for the money you've spent. Of course, I'm not talking about subscriptions. Thank you, everyone. Happy New Year. Including the 72 people who sent text messages cursing my computer to crash. In the end, there was a beginning and an end. From 2010 until the very last moment, he shouted, "Monthly votes." You're tuning into the Phoenix Nights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.